We now come to the general debate on Holocaust Memorial Day. I call Minister Matt Pennycook to move.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. I beg to move the motion in the name of my right honourable friend, the Prime Minister, relating to Holocaust Memorial Day. It is an immense privilege to open this important debate on behalf of the Government. As honourable members will know, 80 years ago this month, soldiers of the Soviet 60th Army of the First Ukrainian Front opened the gates of Auschwitz-Birkenau. That infamous camp has become the symbol of the Shoah and is synonymous around the world with terror and genocide more widely. Its distinctive railway tracks that led almost directly to the gas chambers, as well as the chilling words etched over the gate of the Auschwitz I main camp, Arbeit macht frei, are instantly recognisable, as are the piles of shoes, suitcases and other personal effects, the only remnants of the more than 1 million Jewish men, women and children from every corner of Europe who perished at the site. Almost all the deportees who arrived at Auschwitz-Birkenau camps were immediately selected for death in the gas chambers. It is estimated that the SS and police deported at least 1.3 million people to the complex between 1940 and 1945. Of these, the camp authorities murdered 1.1 million, Madam Deputy Speaker. On Monday, world leaders will gather at Auschwitz-Birkenau to mark the 80th anniversary of its liberation. The United Kingdom will be represented by His Majesty the King. Marla Triptych, MBE, Holocaust survivor and sister of the late Sir Ben Helfgott, may his memory be a blessing, will also be attending. And Madam Deputy Speaker, the number of those who survived the Shoah is, as you will be aware, dwindling, and those who still remain with us grow ever frailer. As a result, this is likely to be the last gathering of Holocaust survivors. 80 years ago, the US 3rd Army's 6th Armoured Division liberated Buchenwald, the largest concentration camp on German soil. General, later President Dwight D. Eisenhower, wrote afterward, and I quote, "I have never felt able to describe my emotional reaction when I first came face to face with indisputable evidence of Nazi brutality and ruthless disregard of every shred of decency." 80 years ago, British forces liberated concentration camps in northern Germany, including Immingham and Bergen-Belsen. They entered the Bergen-Belsen concentration camp about 45 kilometres from Hanover in mid-April 1945. Some 55,000 prisoners, many in critical condition because of a typhus epidemic, were found alive. More than 13,000 of them died from the effects of malnutrition or disease within 3 months of liberation. BBC journalist Richard Dimbleby famously described the scenes of almost imaginable horror that greeted him as he toured Belsen concentration camp shortly after its liberation. Bergen-Belsen began as a prisoner of war camp and was used for Jewish inmates from 1943 onwards. It is estimated, Madam Deputy Speaker, that 70,000 people died there. Richard Dimbleby was the first broadcaster to enter the camp and, overcome, broke down several times while making his report. The BBC initially refused to play the report, as they could not believe the scenes he had described, and it was only broadcast after Dimbleby threatened to resign. The images from Belsen, emaciated figures lying half dead on open ground in freezing weather while thousands of corpses were bulldozed into great pits, are excruciating to witness to this day. Some of those who were first-hand witnesses simply cannot bring themselves to speak of it. It haunts them to this day. Over the decades, Holocaust survivors, many of whom experienced Belsen or Auschwitz, have shared their testimony. But 80 years after the Holocaust, their numbers are dwindling, and soon these first-hand witnesses will no longer be with us. The remarkable Leigh MBE died aged 100 at home in London in October last year. Her life after Auschwitz showed that even in the face of unspeakable evil, the human spirit can triumph. She emerged from the darkness to bear harrowing witness, but also to rebuild hope with future generations. May her memory be a blessing. Henry Wooger, aged 100, and Bob Kirk, aged 99, who both came to the UK on the Kinder transport, died in 2024. Both men dedicated their lives to Holocaust education. The impact that Lily, Henry and Bob had on young and old cannot be overestimated and highlights the importance of first-hand testimony. Both because of the alarming rise of anti-Jewish hate in recent years and because those who survived are now in their 80s and 90s, it is essential that as a country we do more to preserve the memory of this unique act of evil and those who perished in it. It is also imperative that we continue to educate future generations about what happened, both as a mark of respect to those who were lost and those who survived, and as a warning about what happens when anti-Semitism, prejudice and hatred are allowed to flourish unchecked. 27 years ago, former Swedish Prime Minister Göran Persson decided to establish an international organisation that would expand Holocaust education worldwide. He asked President Bill Clinton and former British Prime Minister Tony Blair to join him in this effort. Persson also developed the idea of an international forum of governments interested in discussing Holocaust education, which took place in Stockholm on the 27th to the 29th of January 2000. The forum, Madam Deputy Speaker, was attended by 23 heads of state or prime ministers and 14 deputy prime ministers or ministers from 46 governments. The declaration of the Stockholm International Forum led to the establishment of Holocaust Memorial Day on the 27th of January and the foundation of the International Holocaust Remembrance Alliance, the IHRA. This year, the UK had the privilege of holding the chair of the IHRA, and the UK continues to have an excellent reputation in the field of Holocaust remembrance, education and tackling anti-Semitism. We are fortunate in the UK to have organisations like the Holocaust Educational Trust, led by Karen Pollock, CBE, and the Holocaust Memorial Day Trust, led by Olivia Marks-Waldman, OBE. The Holocaust Educational Trust, which has worked with Holocaust survivors for decades, is well aware of the increasing frailty of survivors and that there will come a day when we will no longer have living first-hand witnesses. That is why they have recently developed Testimony 360, with support of the government, a free digital education programme that combines digital eyewitness testimony with virtual reality, revolutionising access to survivor testimony and providing an invaluable opportunity for students learning about the Holocaust. The UK took on the presidency of IHRA in 2024, with the world on the cusp of significant change in Holocaust remembrance. Within a few short years, Holocaust survivors will move, as I've said, from contemporary memory into history books. How we remember is a matter of debate, but different views coalesce around three headings: landscape, archives, including testimony, and objects. Our presidency has successfully strengthened all three under the general title of In Plain Sight. This title is a reminder, Madam Deputy Speaker, that the Holocaust did not happen in dark corners, but in broad daylight. Jewish men, women and children suffered persecution in the full view of their neighbours, indeed often by their neighbours. Laws discriminating against Jews and depriving them of rights and property were passed openly by legislators. The attempted destruction of the Jewish people and their culture was not conducted in secret, but brazenly and openly. Our presidency was also keen to engage young people and did this through our remarkably successful My Hometown project, which invited schools across IHRA member countries to look at what happened in their hometown during the Holocaust. Schools in former occupied countries and those receiving victims of Nazis and their collaborators produced original and moving projects. Schools participated from as far afield as Argentina, Greece, Canada and Poland, alongside other member countries, including the UK. Projects range widely in their subject matter. One focused on the influence which Holocaust survivors fleeing to Argentina had on the music of Argentinian tango. In Nottingham, an amazing teacher, Dominic Townsend from the Nottingham University Samworth Academy, worked on a remarkable project. The school houses a specialist provision unit for deaf children. Alongside the Nottinghamshire Deaf Society, Dominic created the first Holocaust-specific sign language lexicon to access Holocaust education, to empower our young children to access that education in a way that is inclusive. I'd urge all honourable members to go onto YouTube and watch the video. It is truly inspiring. The UK presidency also worked with the Association of Jewish Refugees on our legacy project, the Holocaust Testimony Portal, which pulls together for the first time testimony from UK Holocaust survivors and refugees who made their home in Britain. This includes testimony from the AJR Refugee Voices Initiative, the UK Holocaust Memorial Foundation, the Shoah Foundation and many more archives. Hopefully, Madam Deputy Speaker, more archives, particularly the smaller, more specialised ones, will join in the coming months. The portal allows users to find a single place the testimonies of individual survivors across the decades. To commemorate the 80th anniversary of the liberation of Auschwitz-Birkenau, we also developed with the AJR the digital project 80 Objects, 80 Lives, A collection of 1-minute clips features 80 objects from film testimonies of British Holocaust survivors and refugees. The objects represent the personal histories and experiences of Jewish Holocaust survivors and refugees before, during, and at the end of the Second World War. Objects like a teddy bear, a doll, a watch, or a spoon take on special meanings. A passport with the letter J, a yellow star, and a bowl from Bergen-Belsen, a bittersweet remnants of a lost world. 80 years after the Holocaust, we sadly still contend with Holocaust denial. Some forms of denial are less common. In some states it is now illegal and punishable under the law. But the forms that Holocaust denial can take are ever-changing. Once it referred to those who claimed 6 million Jews were not murdered, that there were no gas chambers whatsoever. Today these outright deniers are few and mostly relegated to the fringe. The problems we face today are more complex and more subtle. They're often nuanced and difficult to identify. However, that doesn't render them less dangerous or the need to challenge them less compelling. After all, we're living in an age where facts are routinely disputed and disinformation and misinformation are rampant. This presents a real and present danger for Holocaust education, remembrance and research. It has been a long process even for democratic countries to confront their own problematic histories. It was only in 1995, for example, Madam Deputy Speaker, that the French government accepted responsibility for the deportations and deaths of over 70,000 Jews, and Austria finally dispelled the myth of being Hitler's first victim and made amends to Austrian Nazi victims. We've all watched the misinformation emanating from Russia, justifying the war in Ukraine as denazification. But across Eastern Europe, fascist leaders of the past who were involved in the persecution of Jews but fought communism are shamefully being rehabilitated and in some cases being given public honours. Lithuania's Genocide Centre decided the leader of the Nazi-allied Lithuanian Activist Front is worthy of such honours. Hungary's government built a new museum that would tread lightly on the role of local collaborators. Even in Romania, which has done so much to confront its own problematic history, the church is canonising religious leaders who were known for their wartime anti-Semitism. There are other forms of distortion that have come about more quietly. Following a UN recommendation, dozens of countries now mark International Holocaust Remembrance Day with special programmes and educational initiatives. This is a real achievement, but it has brought with it a universalising of the Holocaust and its meaning. There are, however, Madam Deputy Speaker, general lessons on how hatred and intolerance can lead to discrimination, exclusion, and even mass murder, and the need to be open to asylum seekers fleeing for their lives. And yet, with growing frequency, the essential story of the Holocaust, the pernicious spread of anti-Semitism, the widespread indifference, and the genocidal murder of a third of the world's Jewish population is obscured or ignored. It is as though anti-Semitism is no longer a problem and that Jews are no longer threatened. Surely this cannot be the message Holocaust commemoration carries with it. We must guard against watering down Holocaust Memorial Day. It is a day when central to all our commemorations should be the murder of 6 million Jewish men, women and children. Today, Holocaust denial and distortion move instantaneously across social media platforms and are amplified by algorithms which drive anger and division. Sadly, the alarming resurgence of anti-Semitism since the 7th of October shows how the hate of the past is still with us. Today and every day, we stand in solidarity with the Jewish community at home and abroad. The 2025 Holocaust Memorial Day Trust theme, For a Better Future, is particularly timely, because remembrance without resolve is a hollow gesture. Even as we remember the past, we must be ever vigilant about the present and the future. That is why we have a duty to remember and why the new Holocaust Memorial and Learning Centre at the heart of Westminster is so important in keeping the memory of those who were murdered during the Holocaust alive. Finally, Madam Deputy Speaker, it would be remiss of me not to mention the long-awaited ceasefire between Israel and Hamas, which began on Sunday, the 19th of February. As part of that agreement, we saw the release of 3 Israeli hostages taken from their homes and a music festival on the 7th of October, and the release of hundreds of Palestinians. One of the hostages, as honourable members will be aware, was British citizen Emily Damari, who has now been reunited with her family, including her mother Amanda, who never stopped her tireless fight to bring her daughter home. We wish all 3 of the hostages the very best as they begin the road to recovery after the intolerable trauma they've experienced. Yet while we rightly welcome the ceasefire deal, we must not forget about those who remain in captivity under Hamas. We must now see the remaining phases of the ceasefire deal implemented in full and on schedule, including the release of those remaining hostages and a surge of humanitarian aid into Gaza. Hopefully, these first tentative steps will lead to a lasting solution where the people of Israel and the Palestinians can live side by side in peace, and the UK stands ready to do everything it can to support that hope for a permanent and peaceful solution. I look forward to the rest of the debate, Madam Deputy Speaker.
The question is that this House is considered Holocaust Memorial Day. I call Shadow Minister Kevin Hollinrake.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. It is my privilege and solemn duty to open this debate on behalf of the opposition. And can I thank the Minister for his very good and very thoughtful remarks. This year's theme for Holocaust Memorial Day, For a Better Future, encourages to reflect on the lessons of history and the steps we must take to ensure that such atrocities never happen again. This Holocaust Memorial Day also marks the 80th anniversary of the liberation of Auschwitz-Birkenau, a place where over 1 million Jewish people lost their lives. Part of the 1.1 million victims that also included the disabled, members of the gay community and political opponents of the Nazi regime. We should always strive to stamp out the evil that is anti-Semitism. It has no place in our society or any society. Early this month, I, like others, was honoured to sign the Holocaust Educational Trust's Book of Commitment, an honour to speak in this important debate. I also wish to pay tribute to the Trust for their outstanding work in keeping the memory of the Holocaust alive through educational outreach and keeping the Holocaust in our curriculum for over 30 years. Can I also thank survivors of the Holocaust for the work they have done to educate past, present and future generations about the horrors of the past and give us the lessons for the future. My party will always support the Jewish community, so it was encouraging to see the Leader of the Opposition engaging with the Board of Deputies of British Jews, the Jewish Leadership Council and the Community Security Trust to discuss the challenges facing the Jewish community. As part of my role as Shadow Secretary of State, I'm meeting the Jewish Leadership Council in February and look forward to engaging with them and other Jewish organisations in the future. Our party will continue to engage with the community in opposition, and together we reaffirm our commitment to tackling anti-Semitism and promoting community cohesion and holding this government to account on these critical issues. This debate and this period of reflection comes at an important moment for the Middle East, which we hope will usher in a sustainable end to the conflict. Every single hostage must be returned safely home and reunited with family and friends after 15 months of the most unimaginable cruel captivity at the hands of Hamas. We have firmly in our thoughts the victims of the October the 7th terror attacks, those who lost their lives and those whose lives have been changed forever. This was the worst terror attack in Israel's history. We're all relieved to see the first returns of hostages back to their loved ones under the recent ceasefire agreement, including, as the Minister says, the British-Israeli national Emily Damari. We pray for their good health, and I sincerely hope that they can now begin to rebuild their lives after the most unimaginable trauma. None of the hostages nor their families ever deserve to be put through this nightmare. Remembering the Holocaust is something that we must continue to do every day and every year. It cannot be forgotten. This debate is just one way of doing this, as it is all our own responsibility. Indeed, my wife and I took our children to the Holocaust galleries at the Imperial War Museum, which was a very solemn and sobering experience for us all. We also that day visited the memorial at Liverpool Lime Street Station, which is the memorial for the Kind transport. How proud we should be of people like Nicholas Winton, who played their part to help Jewish people flee the horrors of Nazi persecution, saving countless lives and offering hope to those facing darkness. It is also important that we take this opportunity to remember all those killed in genocide around the world. We remember the atrocities in Rwanda, where over 800,000 people were murdered. This year also marks 30 years since the Srebrenica massacre in Bosnia, where more than 8,000 mainly men and boys were killed in just a few days by Bosnian Serb forces. Most were killed in an organised and systemic fashion, blindfolded and shot. Whilst it was mainly men and boys who were murdered, thousands of women and girls suffered unthinkable violence and sexual abuse, including rape and torture, with thousands more, including children and the elderly, abused and displaced. These horrors remind us of the vital importance of standing against hate wherever it arises. And that is why this debate on Holocaust Memorial Day is so important. We must stamp out anti-Semitism and stop it impacting the lives of British Jews and, of course, Jews around the world. But we also owe it to the memory of all victims of genocide to educate future generations and to work tirelessly to prevent history from repeating itself. Let us honour their memory by building a better future, free from hate, division and violence.
I call David Pinto-Duschinsky.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. Each year, Holocaust Memorial Day serves as a powerful reminder of the horrors that humanity is capable of inflicting and where anti-Semitism can lead. For me, this day is not just a time to remember the 6 million Jews murdered across Europe, but also an opportunity to reflect on their personal stories, including my own family's. And critically, this day is also a chance for us to renew our solemn pledge: never again. That pledge has particular meaning for me and my family. Madam Deputy Speaker, my father is a Holocaust survivor. He was born in Budapest in 1943. In spring 1944, after Nazi Germany invaded Hungary, he was herded, along with tens of thousands of other Jews, to the ghetto of Munkacs, his mother's hometown. Over just 2 months, more than 437,000 Hungarian Jews were deported to Auschwitz, the vast majority of whom were murdered. Many members of my family counted among their number and did not survive. But my father did, and so did my grandmother, thanks to the extraordinary bravery of a woman named Maria. In a last desperate throw of the dice, my family entrusted my infant father to her care. She risked everything to smuggle him, and a short time later my grandmother, out of the ghetto just days before it was liquidated. Maria's courage was extraordinary. Her willingness to risk her own freedom, and maybe even her own life for a stranger and her child, is a testament to the power of human decency, even in the darkest of times. I often think of what the last tearful meeting, where my great-grandparents bade farewell to my father, barely 10 months old, knowing they would never see him again, must have been like. I think of my grandmother, forced to live under a false identity for the remainder of the war, not knowing what happened to her family. And I think of Maria, who I never met, who I know little about, but to whom I owe so much. In these moments, the enormity of what happens hits me hardest. A few years ago, I took my family to the Holocaust Memorial at Yad Vashem. There, in their files of those who perished, I looked up my family on my father's side. Now, Madam Deputy Speaker, my name is pretty unusual. But among the names of those who were murdered, I found literally hundreds of Dushinskys. And I know I'm not alone in this. My family's story is far from unique. There are millions of Jewish families with stories like mine, stories of loss, of trauma, of persecution, but also of survival. And not just Jewish families. There are so many others, other victims of Nazi persecution, as well as survivors of the Rwandan genocide, and those in Bosnia, Darfur, and Cambodia, who have similar stories to tell. Victims of hatred, victims of persecution, they are bound together by a common experience and a common humanity. Madam Deputy Speaker, Holocaust Memorial Day is particularly important this year. It comes at a moment of dawning hope after 15 months of darkness, with the release of 3 hostages, including Emily Damari, and a ceasefire in Gaza. And I pray for the safe release of all the hostages, that the ceasefire is sustained, and that we can take the first steps towards a sustained peace. But the 27th of January is also important and critically important this year because it marks the 80th anniversary of the liberation of Auschwitz, a hugely significant milestone. For those of us who know survivors, it will be the last major anniversary where we have them with us. In Hendon, we are enormously proud of the work of our local survivors, including Manfred Goldberg, René Salt, Vera Schalfeld, Peter and Marianne Summerfield, and of course, my good friend, Rabbi Bernd Koshland, all of whom have done so much work to raise awareness. Yet, with each anniversary, the Holocaust slowly but surely slips from living memory. As the generation of survivors passes on, so the responsibility falls upon us to ensure that their stories endure. The torch of remembrance is being passed, and it's down to us, the people here today, to safeguard the memory of the Holocaust, to spread understanding, to tell its stories, and to keep them alive for our children and grandchildren. This isn't just about numbers and statistics. We must remember the people, the families, the communities. We must speak for them, and where we can, make sure their stories and their voices are heard. Especially in an age where misinformation proliferates, where truth competes with a blizzard of distortion and lies, and when conspiratorial thinking and shrill rhetoric numbs us to true horror, we cannot rely on the facts of the Holocaust alone to speak for themselves. We must tell its story insistently and repeatedly and make sure it reaches every ear. That's why the work of the Holocaust Memorial Day Trust in running Holocaust Memorial Day is so important, and why the work of the Holocaust Education Trust, the AJR, and so many other charities is so vital. It's why the government's pledge to ensure that the Holocaust will be at the core of a national curriculum that is taught in every school is so welcome, as is the extra £2 million funding for the HET. And that's why the deep personal commitment of our Prime Minister, seen in his strong advocacy and his recent trip to Auschwitz, is also so critical. Because, Madam Deputy Speaker, this anniversary is not just about remembering. It's about reaffirming our collective commitment to the values that ensure such atrocities can never happen again. That's why the importance of Holocaust Memorial Day cannot be overstated. It is not only a time for reflection, but a time for vigilance, a time when we renew our vow to act. Because as history often reminds us, prejudice and bigotry are light sleepers. At a time when anti-Semitic incidents are up over 1,500%, we can see that hatred, and particularly the world's oldest hatred, is never fully vanquished. It must be fought and defeated anew with every generation. Here in Britain, we take pride in our pluralistic society, a society where people are free to practice their religion, express their identity, and live without fear of persecution. But we must always remember that these freedoms must never be taken for granted. They are the product of a long history of struggle and sacrifice, and they are something that we must constantly protect and defend in our politics, in our rhetoric, and in our daily life. We can all play our part. This coming Monday at 7 p.m, I would urge everyone who can to tune in to BBC One for the national ceremony of commemoration. And at 8 p.m, I'd ask you all to light a candle and put it in your window, a light in the darkness to keep the memory alive. Now, Madam Deputy Speaker, the theme of this year's Holocaust Memorial Day is For a Better Future. The path to a better future, one where tolerance and mutual respect trumps division and bigotry, lies in steadfast defence of our values and a willingness to confront hate. And the foundation of this determination, in turn, rests on our collective remembrance of the Holocaust and a determination to tell its stories and echo its truth down the generations. I know something about that because that is the path my family has trodden. It seems unlikely that a baby boy in a ghetto, leaving his family in the arms of a stranger, might be on a path to a better future. But because of their decency and bravery, he found his way to a place of safety. He travelled to a new country that was a bastion of those values. a country where his son was able to carry his family name, a name that was on the verge of extinction, into Parliament, and sit surrounded by so many colleagues whose own family stories are marked by hardship and oppression. That's why I'm so proud to sit here and so proud to be a co-sponsor of this debate. The lesson that this journey teaches us is that a path to a better future is possible if we work together to build it. On this Holocaust Memorial Day, we should renew our determination to strive to build it every day. Thank you.
Yeah. Liberal Democrat spokesperson Vikki Slade.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. It's a privilege to speak in this debate, and it's really humbling to follow the Honourable Member from Hendon with that incredible testimony about his family. I thank you for that. I must pay tribute to the Speaker and his office for the moving parliamentary ceremony yesterday, especially the testimony of Yisrael and Alf, who both survived the Nazi Holocaust. And to mark this during the same week as the fragile ceasefire in the Middle East and the release of Emily Damari and 2 other hostages makes it extremely more poignant. When my son Isaac was 9, his school, Springdale First, held a World War II tea. Children were invited to bring a grandparent to share their memories of living through the war. But he came home distressed because my parents, his grandparents, were not born until several years after its end. Being an ingenious child, he knocked on the door of our neighbour Margaret and asked her to be his adoptive grandmother for the day, so she could share her memories with his classmates and enjoy the wartime entertainment, which of course included his singing of We'll Meet Again. I tell this story because as the living memory of the Holocaust reduces, it's more important than ever that each of us keeps it alive through our own annual acts of remembrance and in calling out anti-Semitism and all acts of discrimination and hate against groups because of their faith, nationality or identity. 12 years ago, I visited Israel and Palestine as part of a Liberal Democrat delegation, during which we made a trip to Yad Vashem, the Holocaust Museum. The experience stays with me for many reasons, but the thing that struck me hardest was what came well before the death camps like Auschwitz. A decade of dehumanising a whole community, of families being rewarded with crates of beer for betraying their neighbours, of the boycotting of Jewish businesses, the burning of Jewish-authored books, and most strikingly, the sale of ashtrays depicting so-called Jewish faces on them so people could stub out their cigarettes on their faces, helping to foster the feeling that Jews were not really people at all. Last Sunday, I attended a Holocaust Memorial event in Wimborne Minster in my constituency of Mid-Dorset and North Poole. The service, which you can see on the Minster's YouTube page, was based around the book The Violins of Hope, accompanied by the haunting playing of pieces of music reminiscent of that time by classical violinist Emma Marie Kabanova, herself a refugee from Ukraine. As well as the accounts of those whose music continued to be played in the camps, maintaining their hope and retaining their humanity, some of the testimony we heard shared more about what came before the war. How Jewish people were forced to leave their homes and their businesses, how they fled in boats from European shores to reach Palestine, but were refused landing, or worst, died at sea. I closed my eyes to listen to the simplicity of the violin played in the minster as the words of those who lived through that horror were shared with us all, and the contrast of the evil perpetrated in the name of power and ideology with the selflessness of those condemned to death for something they could not control was incredibly moving. By the end of the Holocaust, as we know, 6 million Jewish men, women and children had been murdered in ghettos, mass shootings, concentration and death camps. But in addition, the other forgotten groups targeted by the Nazis for their extermination, among them Romani gypsies, those with disabilities, gay and bisexual men and black people. And this year carries a special significance as we mark 80 years since the liberation of Auschwitz-Birkenau. And next Sunday I'll be attending the Poole Lighthouse Holocaust Memorial event, as I do every year, at which they light candles not just for the victims of the Nazi Holocaust, but also those from later genocides, unbelievably all within my own lifetime in Cambodia, Rwanda, Bosnia, Darfur, because that is what Holocaust Memorial Day is for, looking backwards to look forwards. And the theme of Holocaust Memorial Day this year is for a better future, so I'm going to return to my son Isaac. At the age of 12, he joined his fellow Broadstone Scouts on a European adventure focused on World War II. They travelled, Madam Deputy Speaker, across several countries, alternating light-hearted activity days with visits to the Colditz Castle prisoner of war camp, Auschwitz, and on their return to the Menin Gate to see the war graves and witness the last post at sunset. We thought really carefully about whether he was too young for such a trip, whether he could really understand what he was seeing. But I've seen the positive impact of this trip on him. The relationship that we all build with history and truth goes some way to structuring our perspectives in our adulthood and preventing our susceptibility to dangerous narratives. The work of the Holocaust Education Trust, training and supporting hundreds of teachers each year to help us all learn from the past and work towards a more united future, and of the Anti-Semitism Policy Trust in training decision makers like honourable members, should be commended and supported. But as a spokesperson for housing, communities and local government, it should not be surprising that I'll say that there is a role for our communities to play too. At a time of rising anti-Semitism and Islamophobia, many UK communities are feeling vulnerable, with hostility and suspicion of others rising. The Home Office's own statistics revealed the number of religious-based hate crimes recording in the year to March 24 has rocketed, something they've directly attributed to a spike in anti-Jewish hate. We've also seen inconsistent responses from the police to language and behaviours that may well be anti-Semitic or viewed as hate crimes. So I am calling on the government to ensure that the police have the resources and, most importantly, the training they need to effectively and swiftly respond to anti-Semitic hate crimes and provide funding for security organisations like the Community Safety Trust. We must speak up against Holocaust and genocide denial and distortion. We must challenge prejudice. And as we were told by the Holocaust survivor Alf Garwood in the Speaker's service yesterday, when my parents were coming to terms with their trauma after the war, I saw what hate towards those who had destroyed our lives, did to them. Hate only poisoned them. So as we all continue to remember, work for peace and understanding at a time when the world feels fragile, we in this place must lead that work together for a better future.
Yeah. Don Butler.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker, and it's a pleasure to take part in this debate today and listen to the powerful testimony from my honourable friend from Hendon. And Madam Deputy Speaker, racism, anti-Semitism is on the rise. That is without a doubt. It's on the rise behind closed doors, it's on the rise on the dark web, but it's also hiding in plain sight. And a lot of this we have seen an acceleration after October the 7th. And when my constituent's mum, Noam, when his mum Ada was kidnapped and held hostage, we worked tirelessly day and night for her release. And luckily we saw that day. But Noam's always talking about the strive for peace and how much we need to have peace, and only light when you enter a dark room will make you see clearly. So it's really important that this debate, every year we mark the Holocaust. And although I'm not so well, and I apologise for my voice today, I wanted to come in today to mark this day because hate cannot win. And we have to show time and time again that there are more of us than there are of them. And this debate stands as a warning of the depths of cruelty and hatred that can be released when prejudice is allowed to grow unchecked and unchallenged. And we cannot allow that, especially in this place. And in my own constituency of Brent East, Brent Council marks Holocaust Day every single year. And this year, we will mark it in the iconic Wembley Stadium. And local events bring people together from all backgrounds, Madam Deputy Speaker, to share in the remembrance, united in the mantra of never again, fostering greater understanding and stronger bonds within our community. And as the Holocaust Memorial Day official website states, that the 7th of October attacks in Israel by Hamas and the subsequent war in Gaza, extremists are exploiting the situation to stir up anti-Muslim hatred in the UK. Many UK communities are feeling vulnerable, with hostility and suspicion of others rising. We hope that HMD 2025 can be an opportunity for people to come together, learn both from and about the past, and take actions to make a better future for all. There are many things we can all do to create a better future, it says. We can speak up against Holocaust and genocide denial and distortion. We can challenge prejudice. We can encourage others to learn about the Holocaust and more recent genocides. So I'm proud, Madam Deputy Speaker, to be working with local rabbis in Brent East and Rabbi Mason and others to bring together everyone, including African Caribbeans and Jewish people, so that we can fight together against the rise of prejudice and discrimination. Together, we strengthen our ability to challenge hatred in all of its forms. The chosen theme, as we've heard today, Madam Deputy Speaker, is for a better future. And it calls on all of us to actively work towards a society that stands up against hatred and prejudice. We know that anti-Semitism has risen alarmingly in recent years, and we each have a responsibility to confront these toxic beliefs wherever they appear and whomever is doing it. We cannot afford to be gaslit, Madam Deputy Speaker, and allow hateful ideologies to resurface in the mainstream. We have a collective responsibility to call out such actions and ensure they do not gain traction. As we come together on this important day, we have to ensure that our remembrance is accompanied by action. Genocide and crimes against humanity are not inevitable, Madam Deputy Speaker, and they can be prevented by us. We must raise the alarm when we witness dangerous rhetoric and divisive actions and symbols. We must hold perpetrators accountable. However, the reality is often people are scared because someone else with more power says otherwise, scared of being incorrectly labelled, scared of the unintended consequences. We must not forget, Madam Deputy Speaker, that genocide does not come about overnight, but rather through a gradual process. So even though it can sometimes seem scary, especially if you are not in the in crowd, if we are truly looking towards a better future, hatred cannot and must not be normalised. And if you are the last person standing, calling at the top of your voice for peace and love, then that must be the ultimate goal for a better future. Thank you, Madam Speaker.
Yeah. Bob Blackman.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker, and a pleasure to follow the Honourable Member for Brent East, and I wish her better and recovery from her cold and flu. Can I thank the Government for putting on this debate and making sure that we continue to honour the victims of the Holocaust, and indeed thank the Minister for the way he introduced the debate, both the tone and content of his speech. I declare my interest as co-chairman of the All-Party Parliamentary Group for the Holocaust Memorial and Education Centre since its formation in 2018. And I'm also the chairman of the All-Party Parliamentary Group for Israel. I'm very proud of that fact. Now, this particular Holocaust Memorial Day is particularly prominent and poignant as it marks the 80th anniversary of the liberation of Auschwitz-Birkenau, the largest concentration camp during the war. Time is going quickly, and many of the courageous and inspirational survivors are sadly passing. Thus, it's so important that we preserve their memories, their stories, and teach the next generations so that we don't make the same mistakes again. Now, during my speech, I think I've spoken in every Holocaust Memorial debate since I was elected in 2010. I'm going to focus on some of the origins of the Holocaust and how the United Kingdom could and should have done more to prevent it. What we have to look at is that the Holocaust was one of the most tragic events the world's ever seen. The brutal, systematic murder of 6 million Jewish men, women and children by the Nazis in Germany and its collaborators during the Second War must always serve as a stark reminder to humankind
of the evils that can be perpetrated by humankind. The Jewish genocide didn't officially start until January 1939, but Jews throughout these centuries have been irrationally targeted, dating back as early as 270 BC. I don't intend to go through the history of that. But we fast forward to the end of the Great War, and the escalation of anti-Semitism was about to begin. The Allied forces had sanctioned Germany extremely harshly at the end of the Great War. Germany had to accept full blame for the war and in turn pay the full cost, £6.6 billion. Now in today's money that's huge. Because of the damage they caused during the war. And Alsace-Lorraine, which had been taken from France by Germany in the 1871 war, was returned to the French and Anschluss was banned. They were only allowed to have 100,000 soldiers, no tanks, no air force, and the navy could only have a maximum of 6 battleships. The Rhineland, an area of Germany on the border with France, was demilitarised, and Woodrow Wilson's idea for a League of Nations was agreed. Now, all these reparations caused immense problems for the German people, who believed universally that they were too harsh, not least because of the damage and instability they caused to the German economy. Many held a lot of anger and were ready to shift their blame, and their blame fell on the Jews. Shortly after, the Great Depression hit, sparked off by the Wall Street stock market crash of 1929. Economies across the globe were affected, spurring crisis in world trade prices and unemployment. Almost overnight, the regular loans from the United States, the Dawes Plan, upon which the German economy depended, ceased. So Hitler, a rising star in the German political scene at the time, promised the humiliation of Versailles would be revenged and Germany would be made great again. Many Germans believed they'd been betrayed by the higher command of the army in the Great War, were tired of endless ineffective coalition governments since the war. Now, Hitler had no connections to the elite. He offered a new beginning, and most of all, he promised jobs and bread in a period where unemployment and poverty were at extremely high levels. It's important to think, if we had acted differently after the Great War, would Hitler ever come to power? But what we do know, of course, that he did, and his Nazis embarked on the systematic and deliberate attempt at extinguishing the Jewish race across Europe. Now, next Monday marks the 80th anniversary of the liberation of Auschwitz, which was the largest concentration and extermination camp used by the Nazis. The site consisted of Auschwitz I, which was the main camp, Auschwitz II Birkenau, a concentration and extermination camp with gas chambers and, of course, incinerators. Auschwitz III, one of it, was a labour camp for the chemical conglomerate IG Farben and dozens of other sub-camps. The camps became a major site of the Nazis' horrific final solution to the Jewish question. Between 1942 and late 1944, freight trains delivered Jews from all over Nazi-occupied Europe. And remember, collaborators joined in from across those different countries. A shocking 1.3 million people were sent to Auschwitz and a saddening 1.1 million were murdered. 960,000 were Jews, 865,000 of whom were gassed on arrival, singled out for immediate extinction. 74,000 non-Jewish Poles, 21,000 Romani, 15,000 Soviet prisoners of war, and 15,000 others. Those who were sent to the camp but escaped were being gassed, were murdered via starvation, exhaustion, disease, individual executions or beatings. Others were killed during torturous medical experiments. We should remember what that must have been like. The first mass transport to arrive at Auschwitz contained 728 Polish male political prisoners, including Catholic priests and Jews, on the 14th of June 1940. By 1942, transport was arriving regularly, containing thousands of Jews, all earmarked for execution. On arrival, an inmate's first encounter at Auschwitz, if they were lucky enough not to be sent straight to the gas chamber, they were sent to the Prisoner Reception Centre, where they were tattooed, shaved, disinfected, and given a striped prison uniform. From here, the horrors would escalate dramatically. Youth and fitness for work gained a prisoner a temporary reprieve from the gas chambers. From the time they entered Auschwitz-Birkenau, everything was done to debase and dehumanise the Jews. They were delayed from immediate gassing in order to rob them of their individuality. Each of them was identified solely by the number that he or she was designated. The day would start at 4:30 a.m. with a roll call. Prisoners would walk to their place of work, wearing striped uniforms and ill-fitting wooden shoes without socks. Capos, the prison supervisors, were responsible for the prisoners' behaviour and conformity while they worked, as was an SS escort. The working day lasted 12 hours and was marked by torture and fatigue. Much of the work took place in construction sites, quarries and lumber yards. Visits to the latrines were permitted only at designated times, not when nature called. Work was carried out in the shadow and smoke of the crematoria chimneys that burned incessantly throughout day and night, burning the bodies of murdered Jews and others, including invariably family members that were forced to work. The belching smoke was a constant reminder of their potential fate. In the evening, after block inspection, there's a secondary mandatory roll call. If a prisoner was missing, the others had to remain in place until he or she was found, or the reasons for his or her absence, discovered. After roll call, individual and collective punishments were meted out before the prisoners were permitted to return to their barracks for the night and receive their bread rations and water. Prisoners received a hot drink in the morning, but no breakfast, a watery meatless turnip soup at noon, and in the evening, a small ration of bread. Just think of this. Their daily intake did not exceed any time 700 calories. Sanitary conditions were poor, inadequate latrines and lack of water. The camp was infested with vermin, such as disease-carrying lice. Inmates suffered and died during the epidemics of typhus and other contagious diseases. Now, whilst we commemorate 80 years since Auschwitz was liberated, it's important to note there were 23 main camps across Europe, all with a series of internal camps, totalling over 1,000 camps in all dedicated to torture and exterminate the Jewish community. Towards the latter years of the war, the final solution was implemented, where the Nazis built extermination camps on Polish soil. We have to remember that there was Chelmno, Befsek, Subir, Treblinka, Majdanek, and of course, Auschwitz-Birkenau. I would commend the work of the Holocaust Memorial Trust and Holocaust Educational Trust for the brilliant work they do to educate people in the horrors that people endured. In the summing up, I would urge the Minister to confirm funding for the Holocaust Educational Trust's wonderful programme of lessons from Auschwitz, so young people can learn what happened. Now, it's clear that the Nazis deliberately set out to kill the 6 million Jews, but there are many actions that we in the UK and the United States could have undertaken. Auschwitz was accessed by a vast network of rail routes, bringing trains full of Jews from the whole of Europe. At no point did the Allied forces choose to bomb the rail networks to prevent access to the camp. In 1944, the US War Department refused multiple requests from Jewish leaders to bomb the railway lines leading to the camps, despite the fact that 452 bombers of the 15th Air Force were flying along and across the deportation railway lines on their way to bomb Peshawar oil refineries every day, just weeks later. Time and again, military commanders said a precision strike on the camp had no chance of success, but no study was ever made. Proposals to drop weapons into the camp to enable a rebellion were considered but abandoned. And from 1942 to 1943, British intelligence was regularly able to intercept and decode radio messages sent by the German order police, which included daily prisoner returns and death tolls for the 10 concentration camps, including Auschwitz. Yet still no action was taken. Another common argument was that the Allies did not know the numbers and the horrors of the camps until after the war, despite the fact that hundreds of prisoners escaped and described their ordeals. The United States Office of Strategic Studies, which is the predecessor of the CIA, which had been established in 1941 to 42 to coordinate intelligence and espionage activities in enemy territory, had received reports about Auschwitz during 1942, but no action was taken to target the camp. On the 7th of April 1944, two young Jewish inmates, Rudolf Weber and Alfred Wessler, had escaped from the camp with detailed information about the geography, the gas chambers, the numbers being killed. Roswell McClellan, the US War Refugee Board representative in Switzerland, is known to have received a copy by mid-June and sent it to the board's executive director, but no action was taken. So 80 years on from the liberation of Auschwitz, anti-Semitism has increased significantly in the UK and globally following the 7th of October attacks by Hamas and the subsequent war in Gaza. Many UK communities feel vulnerable with hostility and suspicion of others rising. We hope that Holocaust Memorial Day 2025 can be an opportunity for people to come together, learn from and about the past, and take action to make a better future for all. Now, I'd just like to flag two final points. The first being the situation in Israel and Gaza. It's extremely concerning to see the stark rise in anti-Semitism openly on our streets following the 7th of October attack on Israel by the terrorist organisation Hamas. Jewish people are afraid to go about their lives, having had to hide their identities for fear of being attacked in their own country. We've reiterated time and again that the Holocaust must serve as a reminder that we must never allow such persecution to take place towards any race or religion, and so we must make a conscious effort to stand up against such violations on our own streets. The second point is the Holocaust Memorial Bill, which the Minister kindly mentioned, which is going through this place. Sadly, as time moves forward, many of those survivors are passing, and there are fewer and fewer to share their stories. It's absolutely crucial that we enable the Holocaust Memorial to be built alongside this place, together with the Education Centre, where future generations can learn the true horrors of what happened during the war and pass it on to their children, so we don't allow history to repeat itself. I've had the privilege of visiting the original Yad Vashem and now the modern-day Yad Vashem. Those who visited know the horrors of what the Jewish people encountered, and indeed it's hard to express those horrors. So we must make the bill passing a matter of urgency so that the few Holocaust survivors still with us are able to see the centre for themselves and be proud of the amazing work they have done in sharing their stories. So I leave the House on this particular issue with a particularly poignant quote. I wish to end my speech with the words of Sir Ben Helfgott, MBE, Holocaust survivor and successful Olympic weightlifter, whose words should resonate with us all when assessing the urgency of this project. Sir Ben exclaimed, "I look forward to one day taking my family to the new National Memorial and Learning Centre, telling the story of Britain and the Holocaust. And one day I hope that my children and grandchildren will take their children and grandchildren, and that they will remember all those who came before them, including my mother Sarah, my sister Louisa, and my father Moshe. Sadly, last year Sir Ben died. I've no doubt through the Memorial and Learning Centre, his memory and story will live on for his children, grandchildren and generations to come, so that we can all learn the lessons from the Holocaust and vow never to repeat them."
Joe Platt.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. And it is an immense privilege to speak in this debate today to express my heartfelt support for Holocaust Memorial Day. This day is not merely a reflection on a single tragedy in human history. It is a reminder to remember the 6 million Jewish men, women and children murdered during the Holocaust and to honour those who survived.
And can I pay tribute to the Honourable Member from for Hendon for such a moving personal account on the importance of such an honour to honour those that did survive. And the theme for this year, For a Better Future, resonates deeply, for it calls upon each of us to reflect on our role in building a more peaceful society. It reminds us that we all share a collective responsibility to ensure that no one suffers prejudice, discrimination or violence because of their faith, ethnicity or any other characteristics. So 5 weeks before the horrific massacre committed by Hamas in 2023, as part of a wider delegation, I had the opportunity to visit Israel and the Palestinian territories. During this visit, I met with leaders from both sides of a long-standing conflict, and I witnessed something that left a lasting impression on me. Young people, both Jewish Israelis and Muslim Palestinians, who were critical of their leaders, but united in their shared desire for peace. They, like us, want an end to the cycle of violence and leadership that will guide them towards a better future. And that is a message that I will hold on to. But, Madam Deputy Speaker, during my visit, I had the profound honour of experiencing Yad Vashem. The exhibits, documents, testimonies and historical artefacts told a story that was truly harrowing. And what struck me most was the reminder that the Holocaust did not occur in isolation or overnight. It was the culmination of years of cultivated hatred, prejudice and dehumanisation. The horror of the Holocaust wasn't just the atrocity itself, it was the slow erosion of civility and the gradual unravelling of humanity. And this is why we must continue to resist anti-Semitism, Islamophobia, all discrimination and persecution in every form. Holocaust Memorial Day is understanding how hatred creeps into society and how we must, as individuals and communities, prevent them from taking root again. Madam Deputy Speaker, education does play a vital role in this process, and I welcome this government's announcement and the focus on teaching the Holocaust to ensure pupils understand why and how it happened. And more locally, I would like to take this opportunity to express my sincere gratitude to Joan Livesey for her dedication in organising Holocaust Memorial events in my constituency and beyond. Her work with schools to engage young people in learning about the Holocaust is essential in ensuring that this history is never forgotten. And one of these events will be held at Leigh Film Factory for poignant screening of Sophie's Skull, The Final Days. These efforts are crucial. They create spaces for communities to come together to reflect on these horrific events. And they remind us of the values we must all work towards in this House: tolerance, acceptance and mutual respect for all people regardless of their background. Wherever hatred exists, whether it's in the UK or elsewhere, we must challenge it. We must confront the language of hate and bigotry wherever it is found and ensure that we never allow these forces to gain a foothold again.
Martin Vickers.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. I'm pleased to contribute to this important debate, and I thank those individuals and organisations that work throughout the year to ensure that the Holocaust Memorial Day is commemorated, and that particularly our young people are reminded of the horrors of the past and encouraged to work towards peace that all right-thinking people seek. As members will be aware, Holocaust Memorial Day falls every year on the 27th of January, and has already been mentioned, that date is the date when the notorious Auschwitz-Birkenau camp was liberated. This year, the date marks 80 years since that liberation, and it is just as important now as any year in the past that we remember the 6 million Jewish victims of the Holocaust and the millions of other victims of Nazi persecution, along with those who have been victims of genocides since then. Sadly, 80 years on, anti-Semitism is at an all-time high, as is anti-Muslim hatred. It is for this reason that I want to focus on the Srebrenica genocide, which took place in July 1995 during the Bosnian War. Despite the international community pledging after the Holocaust that mass atrocities would never again occur, mass atrocities have remained a feature of the world since World War II, and as we saw in Bosnia just 30 years ago. Whilst I was working as the constituency agent for the father of the house, my right honourable friend, the member for Gainsborough, I studied part-time at Lincoln University for a politics degree, and one of the units was the breakup of the former Yugoslavia. Subsequently, when fortunate enough to be elected to this house, I took the opportunity to become involved in the all-party groups for the Western Balkan nations, and was then appointed as the Prime Minister's trade envoy to that region. I have visited Srebrenica on 2 occasions, and I challenge anyone to visit a site where genocide has taken place to be other than moved by the experience. How can such evil be perpetrated? There seems no end of man's inhumanity to man. The same emotions are stirred when visiting war graves in France, Belgium, or wherever. In 2012, I was a part of a delegation to Gaza. Things were bad then, but much worse now. But one of my abiding memories was visiting the site of the Commonwealth War Graves Cemetery there. Small compared to many, but as we are reminded in November each year, the tombstones stand row on row. The local man and his son who cared for the graves, and if I remember correctly, his name was Ibrahim, did so much with as much care as if they were caring for their own family plots. When focusing on the evil that is perpetrated in our world, we must never lose sight of the goodness exemplified by those like Ibrahim, who show love and care, often as in that cemetery in Gaza, for those they never knew. Both of my visits to Srebrenica were led by our former colleague, the Right Honourable and gallant member, Colonel Bob Stewart, whose affection for the country and its people is self-evident when you are privileged to witness his interaction with local people. In 1995, 8,372 Bosniak Muslim men and boys were murdered during the massacre of Srebrenica. Murders mainly committed by units of the Bosnian Serb Army of Republika Srpska, in what is recognised as the worst crime on European soil since World War II. I understand that the massacre in Srebrenica, a town in eastern Bosnia-Herzegovina, was the first legally recognised genocide in Europe since the end of World War II. These events followed Bosnia declaring independence from Yugoslavia in 1992, which was resisted by the Bosnian Serb population who wanted to be part of a greater Serbia. Sadly, Bosnian Serbs were prepared to achieve this goal by isolating ethnic groups, their own neighbours, and if necessary, exterminating them. A campaign of war crimes, ethnic cleansing and genocide was committed on the non-Serb population of the former Yugoslavia, and the culmination of the Bosnian War resulted in the death of around 100,000 people and the displacement of over 2 million men, women and children. As I mentioned earlier, in July 1995, Bosnian Serb troops and paramilitaries descended on the town of Srebrenica and began shelling it. When these troops took the town, they proceeded to separate Bosniak men and boys over the age of 12 from women and younger children. Over the course of several days, over 8,000 Bosniak Muslim men and boys were murdered in and around Srebrenica, merely because of their ethnicity. Shockingly, the perpetrators were often former neighbours, classmates and teachers of those they persecuted. Those who were murdered were both young and old, and I understand that the eldest was 94 years old and the youngest merely 5. They were killed in some of the most brutal and barbaric ways imaginable, and their bodies of the murdered were bulldozed into mass graves in an attempt to conceal them. The testimony of survivors is harrowing. There are reports of children being murdered by soldiers with knives, the bodies of elderly men lying on the ground with their eyes gouged out, the mass rape of women and even children. One can find it very difficult to believe the horrors that men are capable of. When visiting Srebrenica, one is reminded of the evil that can take place even in mainland Europe. In fact, it is important that we note that these atrocities didn't take place in some faraway land in an age long past, but right here in Europe, on our doorstep, and less than 3 decades ago. The children who witnessed these atrocities firsthand, who saw things that no children should ever see, many of them will be our adults now with young children of their own. That's how recent this genocide was. As such, the commemoration of these events serves as a warning to all of us, particularly those in government or positions of influence. What can happen here in Europe, which in the main in the past post-war period we tend to think of as civilised, safe and secure, particularly compared with many parts of this troubled and becoming ever more troubled world. Holocaust Memorial Day reminds us where prejudice, fear and hatred can lead, particularly if they become normalised and encouraged. The theme for Holocaust Memorial Day 2025 is for a better future. It is only by learning from the past that we can strive for that better future. Madam Deputy Speaker, evil can it seems enter the hearts and minds of men of all races and creeds. As the service of Compline in the Book of Common Prayer says, we must be vigilant because our adversary the devil, as a roaring lion, walketh about seeking whom he may devour. These are stark words. Sadly, the devil can enter the hearts of people, especially when propaganda and evil leadership are involved. We must never forget the brutality that man is capable of, and it is right that we use parliamentary time to commemorate these horrific events. The atrocities now taking place across the world remind us that we must remain eternally vigilant. The UK's voice on this matter is important, and I'm proud that we have contributed over many generations to the attempt to bring peace and stability to many troubled parts of the world. The tragic events in Srebrenica or the Holocaust or other genocides since then must never be forgotten, and we must continue to speak out on this issue if we hope for our children and grandchildren to have a better future. Thank you.
John Pearce.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. And I'd like to start by thanking the Minister and the Shadow Minister for their statements, and also my honourable friend from Hendon for his moving story of his family. Like many other members who've spoken in this debate today, I visited Yad Vashem in July 2023. Nothing quite prepares you to stand in the Hall of Names, surrounded by the images of those who perished in the Holocaust, and the pages of testimony which details their lives so cruelly and brutally cut short by the greatest act of mass murder in human history. But to describe them simply as victims robs them once again of their humanity, their dignity, their individuality. As Benjamin Fontaine, a French-Romanian poet who was murdered at Auschwitz just 3 months before its liberation, wrote, "Remember only that I was innocent, and just like you, mortal that day. I too had had a face marked with rage by pity and joy, quite simply a human face." 2 days after visiting Yad Vashem, I visited kibbutz Kfar Aza, a quiet, unassuming kibbutz close to the border with Gaza, founded on socialist principles by Mizrahi refugees from Morocco, Egypt, in 1951. None of us knew that day when we visited that within weeks its peace and tranquility would be shattered. The kibbutzniks murdered and raped, and hostages taken, including our own Emily Damari, whose release alongside the 2 other hostages at the weekend has provided a glimmer of light in the darkness. Now we must make sure all of the hostages come home to their families. None of us knew that day when we visited that on the 7th of October 2023, the Jewish people would suffer the bloodiest day in their history since the terrible events of 8 decades ago, which we mark today. That modern-day pogrom was committed at the hands of Hamas, an organisation which shares the same genocidal aspirations and sadistic fervour of those who perpetrated the Holocaust. And none of us knew that day that within hours of those terrorist attacks, Britain would see the first wave of anti-Semitic incidents, which have lasted the year reaching their highest recorded total. It is beyond shameful in 21st century Britain that Jewish places of worship are defaced, graffitied, that they require protection by security guards, that Jewish pupils are unable to wear their uniforms on the way to school, and that Jewish students are intimidated on our campuses. All the while, anti-Semites take to our streets, chanting for jihad, glorifying Hamas's crimes, and comparing the state of Israel to those who sought to annihilate European Jewry less than a century ago. But Britain is not unique. In Amsterdam, Israeli football fans have been hunted, attacked and abused on the eve of the anniversary of Kristallnacht. In Melbourne, a synagogue was set alight while worshippers were sat inside. And in the UAE, a young rabbi was kidnapped and murdered. Each of these crimes reminds us that hatred against Jews and hatred against the world's Jewish state cannot be separated. Anti-Zionist anti-Semitism is simply the latest iteration of history's oldest hatred. As the Prime Minister rightly said last week when he visited Auschwitz, where is never again when we see the poison of anti-Semitism rising around the world in the aftermath of the 7th of October? I am proud that our Prime Minister and this government is committed to tackling that evil. I commend the work of all those, especially the Board of Deputies, the Jewish Leadership Council, CST, the Holocaust Education Trust and the Holocaust Memorial Day Trust, who work day in, day out to fight anti-Semitism and to teach our children and young people of the utter horrors that can be unleashed if it goes unchallenged. But the battle against anti-Semitism and hatred must be fought on many fronts, and it is on all of us to join that fight. For a better future, we cannot be bystanders. I wish to close with the words of Elie Wiesel on the perils of indifference and the dangers of passivity. We must always take sides. Neutrality helps the oppressor, never the victim. Silence encourages the tormentor, never the tormented. Thank you, Madam Deputy.
Hear, hear.
Jess Brown-Fuller.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker, and I'm very grateful to the Government for making time for the House to debate this important topic of Holocaust remembrance ahead of Monday's Holocaust Memorial Day, a day of solemn remembrance and reflection. On that day, 80 years will have passed since the death camp Auschwitz-Birkenau was liberated, yet the memories remain as poignant as ever, largely due to the day that we mark every year, so I'm very grateful to the Government for making time. 6 million Jewish men, women and children were brutally murdered by the Nazis, along with millions of others who suffered under the prosecution by the Nazis. The Holocaust was a crime of such magnitude that a new word was coined by Polish lawyer Raphael Lemkin to describe its horrors: genocide. And today we also remember the victims of more recent genocides, including those in Bosnia, Rwanda, Cambodia and Darfur. These atrocities are a stark reminder that hatred and intolerance, if left unchecked, can have devastating consequences, inflicting terror and completely eradicating entire communities. These tragic events serve as stark reminders that we as a global community have not yet fully learned the lessons of the past, and that the promise of never again is not something we are doing a good job of upholding. We cannot stand by while radicalisation and hatred flame up around us, while 245,000 survivors of the Holocaust are still alive today. It's not even been a lifetime since the world promised justice at the Nuremberg trials and promised never again. And yet anti-Semitism is rising once more here in the UK and around the world. Extremist voices are fueling division and fear, exploiting tensions to spread further hatred, disinformation and cultural amnesia. So we must remain vigilant, for the lessons of the Holocaust teach us that silence is never an option. In my constituency of Chichester, we are proud to have a community that is committed to remembrance and also education. Over the past decade, Chichester Marks Holocaust Memorial Day has organised meaningful events, from ceremonies held in local assembly rooms or educational films and talks for our school children, ensuring that our future generations understand the impact of the Holocaust and the importance of standing up against prejudice and intolerance. And this year, Chichester Festival Theatre will host The Last Train to Tomorrow, which is an opera that tells the story of the Kindertransport, a rescue effort that brought 10,000 Jewish children to safety here in the UK. Such stories remind us of our shared humanity and the power of compassion in the face of unimaginable darkness. And I'd like to take the opportunity, Madam Deputy Speaker, to praise the chair of Chichester Marks Holocaust Memorial Day, Councillor Claire Apel, whose dedication has been instrumental in making these events happen over the past decade, and her personal connection to the Holocaust, having lost 50 members of her family, serves as a poignant reminder as to why we should never forget. And on Monday, a new blue plaque will be unveiled as part of the Selsey Heritage Trail to commemorate the part that Selsey played in helping the Kindertransport children who came to the UK. As we look to the future, plans are underway to establish a permanent memorial site in my constituency of Chichester to honour the victims and educate generations to come. This initiative stands as a testament to our collective commitment to ensuring that never again is not just a phrase, but a call to action. The words, "Those who cannot remember the past are condemned to repeat it," are inscribed at the memorial site at Auschwitz. So today we honour the survivors, the victims, and those who continue to bear witness. It is our collective responsibility to carry forward their legacy, to challenge hatred wherever we see it, and to build a future based on understanding and respect for all. Thank you.
Yeah. Melanie Ward.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. It is impossible to do justice to the scale of the horror witnessed by those entering Auschwitz-Birkenau when it was liberated 80 years ago. They found a death camp that was specifically designed to facilitate starvation, forced labour, and the most chilling methods of mechanised execution in human history. Historians estimate that 1.1 million people perished at Auschwitz in just under 5 years. Across the whole of Nazi-occupied Europe, 6 million Jewish people were murdered, and millions more prisoners of war, political prisoners, Poles, disabled people, members of the LGBT community, Roma and others were slaughtered. I want to say how moving I found the speech of my right honourable friend, the member for Hendon. And I wanted to share my own family's story. One of those who we believe was lost was my great-grandfather, a Polish Jew who emigrated to the UK and changed our family's name in the face of anti-Semitism here. He returned to Poland just before the Second World War, and my family never heard from him again. That is just one reason why I am proud that my constituency contains the Kirkcaldy Polish Club, branch number 50 of the Association of Polish Combatants, set up across the UK after the Second World War by heroic Poles who, together with so many others, resisted Nazi aggression. I read a letter written by Helen Oglethorpe, a British medic who was one of the first into Bergen-Belsen when it was liberated. The letter was dated 28th of May 1945, and she described some of what she found. We left Holland on the 29th of April and came up to the Belsen concentration camp. It has been truly terrible, and I never really believed what the newspapers told us, but it was even worse than that. The first few weeks we spent clearing out all the SS and Hungarian troops' barracks and turning them into hospitals and cleaning out the actual concentration camp. There were 52,000 living and 10,000 unburied dead in an area of about 1 square mile. One can't imagine it unless one has seen it. A further 13,000 died on our hands in the next 3 or 4 weeks. We had medical students working in the concentration camp, picking out the people who might live and trying to clean up a bit. Madam Deputy Speaker, despite the Nazis' attempts to strip their victims of their humanity, including by assigning numbers to those held in concentration camps, these people were not numbers or statistics. They were humans, loved by their families, and they were citizens who contributed to the cultural, economic, and social life of Europe. Indeed, across the great cities of Europe and beyond, each Holocaust memorial is marked by an attempt to remember these people by using their names. That is why I would like to commend the important work done by the Holocaust Educational Trust. Each year, as we've heard today across the House, we lose Holocaust survivors, and their efforts to keep the stories of survivors and victims alive ensure that we do not forget them, or indeed what was done to them. The theme for Holocaust Memorial Day 2025 is For a Better Future. In the face of mass atrocity crimes taking place across the world today, the need for us in this place, and indeed globally, to work for a better future could not be clearer. We must learn the lessons of history, especially in this era of misinformation. We know what happens when anti-Semitism, hatred and prejudice are allowed to flourish. We must do far more to prevent identity-based violence, genocide and mass atrocity crimes. We must honour those who perished in the Holocaust and those who survived. Thank you.
Shockat Adam.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. Hate is the worst 4-letter word that exists. Holocaust survivor Matilda Middleberg. I am deeply honoured to be called into this debate. As movingly articulated by the Honourable Member for Hendon, 80 years has passed since the liberation of Auschwitz, but it's heartbreaking to see that acts of genocide, acts of hate, acts of evil are still happening across the world and increasing threats from a new wind of far right. The horrors of these camps must never be forgotten, and the testimony of the survivors are still ringing in our ears and are relevant today as they were 80 years ago. Because what is 80 years in the history of the world but a blink of an eye? Yet sadly, current events suggest that some people today need a reminder of the lessons of that horror. For the 75th anniversary of the liberation of the Belsen-Bergen, Leicester University, in my constituency, published extracts from the East Midlands Oral History Archive of an interview with the Leicester nurse, Ertie Wilford. Ertie treated the survivors of Bergen-Belsen for 2 years after its liberation by the British Army. She spoke of approaching Belsen and the dreadful smells from as far away as 5 miles, saying that she had never seen so much suffering and lice and filth. At Belsen, they were just a bag of bones, and it was just dreadful. But some of them lived, and it was quite incredible. Ertie recalls the excitement of a camp doctor. An excitement of a camp doctor finally being allowed to deliver a baby and return it back to its mother, rather than hand it to a guard for execution. We must remember the names of these people, because their final resting place is Belsen-Bergen, and they are Anne and Margaret Frank, who unfortunately died of typhus approximately just 1 month before the liberation. Now, one would hope that these experiences would mean that hate and genocidal and Nazi actions would be a thing of the past. But sadly, this is not the case. As articulated by the Right Honourable Member for Brigg and Immingham, the situation in Bosnia, when the trucks arrived and said, "Men, young and old, tall and short, get on, we will transport you to safety." Within 2 weeks, 8,000 Muslim men, women and children were executed. I will do.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker, and just commend the honourable friends across the House for their contributions. I wondered if my right honourable member would join me in congratulating organisations like Remembering Srebrenica, who've done so much to ensure that the Bosnian genocide, which is now some 30 years ago, and we'll be remembering that anniversary this year, and not only helping us remember those Muslim boys and men that were killed as you describe, but also to learn lessons and other organisations like them. Thank you.
I really welcome that intervention, and absolutely all the work that is being done is absolutely vital. Following on, Tutsis in Rwanda, close to 1 million, and as we speak, in Sudan. If never again is to mean anything, it means the international community has to take decisive action to pursue the perpetrators through the International Court of Justice. But instead, we are seeing the far right almost being indulged. Just earlier this week, people who were rioters in January 6th with very much far right tendencies are being forgiven, and many were radicalised online. This year's Holocaust Memorial Day theme is Take Action for a Better Future. That is why I'm delighted to hear from the Minister that education is still going to remain a priority, because if we do not learn the lessons of history, we will relearn to live them again. The interfaith work is absolutely vital, and that was why I'm very proud to have been part of a team that set up an interfaith group so that religions can talk to each other, not to point fingers, not to burn bridges, but to build them. And also, we must take action against social media firms and publishers and hold them to account for far-right misinformation. I will end with the words of Elie Wiesel. We must take sides. Neutrality helps the oppressor, never the victim. Silence encourages the tormentor and never the tormented. Thank you.
Jermy.
Madam Deputy Speaker, and it's a real privilege today to be here as part of this debate, and a privilege to hear so many poignant contributions from members. A number of members have spoke about the importance of education, and it's clear to me that as time passes, the importance of education increases yet further. And next week I have the distinct privilege of attending one of the 80 Candles for 80 Years events to mark the 80th anniversary. And I was honoured that the Lotus Academy Trust in my constituency of South West Norfolk have invited me to join that service and be part of a very special nationwide arts and education project to mark the event. And as a former youth worker myself, the importance of education and carrying on that message is very pertinent to me. The unimaginable horrors and crimes of the Holocaust were a very defining moment in the 20th century. And through events such as the 80 Candles, we keep alive the memory of those who lost their lives under Nazi persecution. On Monday, I'm also attending a Holocaust Memorial Day flag-raising ceremony in Thetford, organised by Thetford Town Council in my constituency. And I'm very pleased that the first time ever they will be flying the Holocaust Memorial Day flag. And I pay tribute to the Mayor of Thetford, Councillor Chris Harvey, who has long campaigned for this flag to be raised. And I think it's entirely fitting that the flag has been raised this year in his term as Mayor, but also to mark this 80th anniversary. As other members have done so, I would like to pay tribute to the work of the Holocaust Memorial Day Trust, because the impact of the work that they do and the impact on education that they have provided over 2 decades is a real testament to their dedication and their commitment, and I have certainly benefited from their work. Finally, we mark this week, as the Minister mentioned in his opening remarks, we mark the 25 years since the Holocaust Memorial Day was created, and the UK as one of those founding signatories of the Stockholm Declaration of Holocaust Remembrance in 2000, and this is something that we should all be very rightly proud of. Through this, the UK government, alongside 45 other countries, committed to preserving the memory of those who were murdered in the Holocaust. And I know that members from all sides of this House still stand by that commitment, and I believe that is something that we should never let falter or waver. Thank you.
Cameron Thomas.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. We had reached the bottom. It is not possible to sink lower than this. No human condition is more miserable than this, nor could it conceivably be so. Nothing belongs to us anymore. They have taken away our clothes, our shoes, even our hair. They will even take away our name, and if we want to keep it, we will have to find ourselves the strength to do so, to manage somehow so that behind the name something of us as we were still remains. He who loses all often easily loses himself. My number is 174517. We have been baptised. We will carry the tattoo on our left arm until we die. Prisoner 174517 was liberated from Auschwitz concentration camp in January 1945, one of only 20 surviving members of those 650 who arrived on his transport 11 months earlier. He was liberated strictly in a physical sense, but remained tortured by what he had experienced until his death in 1987. Before his death, Italian Jewish liberal Primo Levi wrote extensively about his experiences. I recommend his collection of essays entitled The Drowned and the Saved as one of the bleakest and yet compulsive books that I've ever read. My past visits to Dachau and Sachsenhausen camps cast long shadows in my memory. We are fortunate that those relics of this horror continue to haunt the landscapes as foreboding reminders. But with surviving voices fading year on year, we must guard against the path that led to Auschwitz. The Holocaust was unique in its industrialization of genocide. Nothing so terrible at such scale had happened before nor since. We must not delude ourselves that it could not. As said the Honourable Member for Hendon, never again must mean never again. The MP for Brent East said that genocide does not occur overnight. The black shoots of fascism were intolerance. It was then, as it is now, spread throughout a frustrated population, appealing to their sense of national identity and stimulating a feeling of injustice. In this environment, nationalism festers, and larger groups are mobilised by divisive populism, which validates them as superior but oppressed by an imagined elite and undermined by minorities. In the 1920s and 1930s Germany, the Jews were both the imagined elite and the minority. Today, we see various groups demonised: Jews, Muslims, refugee, it depends on the source. I recommend a compilation of Nazi propaganda entitled The Jewish Enemy by Geoffrey Herf. Should you choose to read it, you will observe very clearly the parallels between such propaganda then and now. It is not a coincidence. It is learned and it is finessed. The same stereotypes, the same accusations, the same divisive rhetoric, and the same risks of following that same terrible path. We must not be fooled by those who mislead us, who minimise, normalise, and amplify the actions and the rhetoric of division and fascism. Those who do must be challenged, outed, and comprehensively defeated. I associate myself with the Minister's statement that remembrance without resolve is not enough. Let us honour the memory of those who suffered the Holocaust by standing vigil to stave off its repeat.
Bulwer.
And can I pay tribute to my honourable friend for Hendon too, for his powerful, moving testimony. Your grandparents will be truly proud. 2025 marks 80 years, as many have said, since the liberation of the Nazi concentration and death camps. As many have said, that awful milestone means this is likely to be the last landmark anniversary at which a significant number of Holocaust survivors will be present. Holocaust Memorial Day encourages us to remember, yes, the 6 million Jewish men, women and children murdered by the Nazis and by their collaborators during the Holocaust. It also allows us to remember all those who were persecuted by the Nazis, including the Roma, the Sinti people, gay men, disabled people, political opponents and others. And we remember too all those affected by subsequent genocides in Cambodia, Rwanda, Bosnia, of which I'll say more, and Darfur. And when it comes to remembering Elie Wiesel, the Holocaust survivor and scholar, already quoted by my honourable friend for High Peak, he put it best when he said, "Whoever listens to a witness becomes a witness. So those who hear us, those who read us, must continue to bear witness for us." Yesterday, thanks to Mr. Speaker in Portcullis House, many of us did indeed bear witness, as we heard the extremely moving testimony of 2 Holocaust survivors, Yisrael Abeles and Alfred Garwood. Now, we all know many old soldiers who never recount the trauma they suffered in the war, quite understandably, often because they blanked it out and moved on. But for many of those who were not soldiers, who were survivors of genocide, they have shown an extraordinary strength and perseverance to keep telling their story, however painful, through a need to keep their memories alive, and they do so again and again. Their testimonies are so direct, so powerful, that when you hear it, you become part of that remembering process. Yisrael Abeles, now aged 96, was just 14 when he and his family were deported to Auschwitz-Birkenau, where his parents, David and Haya, and younger brother Aaron, aged just 11 years old, were sent to the gas chambers upon arrival. That sense of the history books becoming all too chillingly real jumped out yesterday when Yisrael said he was greeted on arrival at the camp by the infamous angel of death, Josef Mengele. He said, "Mengele asked me, 'How old are you?' I understood a bit of German and said, 'I'm 14, it was just my birthday.' And he replied, 'That's very good,' and sent me to the right side. As Yisrael said, 'I didn't know it at the time, but what he meant was, very good, you can stay temporarily alive.' And Alfred's story too should show us all that while hate is immensely destructive, there's strength in community. He told us how he was a blonde babe in arms carried by his father, a father who saved the life of another inmate in Bergen-Belsen by giving them bread across the barbed wire. It was so moving to hear him recall that after the war his father met that same fellow campmate in the East End of London. And it was moving too to hear how Alfred became a doctor and a psychiatrist to help other trauma victims, how he said that hatred, even hatred of those who committed the genocide, was a corrosive force. That desire to rid ourselves of hatred was echoed by Mohammed, one of the pupils at Fairlinge Park High School in my constituency in Rochdale, who wrote this line in a poem about the Holocaust: "Revenge is never sweet. It's a monster willing to prevail." Fairlinge High School is a multicultural school that has legacy beacon status as one of the schools under the umbrella of the UCL Centre for Holocaust Education. 2 years ago, they hosted Holocaust survivor Ike Alterman to deliver his testimony. And yesterday, they again attended the Greater Manchester Holocaust Commemoration hosted by Andy Burnham. So I'm delighted that the Prime Minister said it will be a national ambition that every school child should hear the recorded testimony of a Holocaust survivor. And the Chancellor has announced a further £2 million for Holocaust education in the budget. As the Minister said earlier, the Holocaust Education Trust's innovative free digital education programme, Testimony 360, will allow students to have a virtual reality conversation with a Holocaust survivor, long after the survivors themselves are no longer with us. The prioritisation of Holocaust education within our schools has been praised across this House today, and rightly so. But the prevention of Holocaust denial cannot be left to just passing laws or education. It must be a cultural change, a grassroots change that exists alongside formal education. Education does not begin and end within our schools. Some children will go back to a home from a lesson where parents and older siblings fill their heads with misinformation and unchecked sources from social media. Sadly, there's now a depressingly familiar routine of a sharp spike in attacks on synagogues or on mosques whenever a news breaks about an atrocity that has no personal connection to the people worshipping inside those buildings. There's a well of simmering loathing that lurks unseen, that's topped up by casual racism that formal education alone cannot fix. And as the member for Brigg and Immingham has powerfully reminded us, 2025 marks the 30th anniversary of the genocide in Bosnia and the massacre at Srebrenica. The tragedy is that the story of what happened in Srebrenica 30 years ago is not being told in Srebrenica itself. The enclave went into Serbia as part of a peace deal, where denying the massacre now is official policy in and out of schools. This has been raised by Baroness Hellich in The Other Place, a fierce advocate for justice on this massacre. A Srebrenica Memorial Centre report last year identified prominent public figures involved in this denial of the Holocaust, including Republika Srpska President Milorad Dodik and Serbian President Aleksandar Vučić, amongst others. Last year, my former newspaper, The Eye, reported election posters in Republika Srpska in windows with the slogan, "Genocide didn't happen." One billboard praised convicted war criminal Ratko Mladic, the Bosnian Serb military chief known as the Butcher of Bosnia. His crimes included the massacre of those 8,000 Bosniak Muslim men and boys at Srebrenica in July 1995. The bloodbath was indeed the worst episode of mass murder in Europe since the Second World War. I'm proud to say that my wife was among the Channel 4 news team who exposed those horrific war crimes. It's worth saying that genocides don't come out of the blue. They depend on what Professor David Feldman has described as the reservoir of hate. Professor Feldman pointed out the danger in the case of anti-Semitism is not just the virus of anti-Semitism that captures a minority of anti-Semites. The wider danger is a widely diffused reservoir of stereotypes and narratives about Jews. As he said, this reservoir has accumulated over centuries and has become part of our common culture. The same applies to Islamophobia as it does to anti-Semitism. When weaponised by extremists, the legitimate and proud celebration of one's community identity curdles into the denigration of another's. History is used and warped. Territory and belonging are weaponised into separation and segregation. Dates are cited as battle cries. The cycle perpetuates. Now, anger is a legitimate emotional response to atrocities, but hatred is not. Peace is hard, compromise is painful. Violence and the prejudice it relies on are easier. But everyday racism can only be countered by everyday engagement, and disinformation countered by information. The Holocaust was the industrialisation of murder, but the difference was only one of scale from the many pogroms that Jewish communities have had to suffer over the centuries. In Soho this month, the National Holocaust Centre has devised a new touring exhibition called The Vicious Circle. It links 5 Jewish communities decimated by violence. Objects are on display to represent coexistence and integration into the host country before 5 particular pogroms. Berlin 1938, Baghdad 1941, Kielce in Poland in 1946, Aden in Yemen 1947, and of course Kibbutz Kisufim in October 7, 2023. That's the history, this is the present. The well, the reservoir, is there and it needs to be drained. I end, like many others, with another quote from Elie Wiesel. Much depends on us, on our sense of justice and integrity, on our dedication to the truth, on our willingness to share our innermost memories, and we survivors are promised that we shall try. As the number of survivors dwindles, it's on us, it's our duty in this place to follow their heroic example and honour their memory every day.
Kirsty Blackman.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. It's not often in this House that everyone from every party speaks with one voice. It's not often that we stand here and don't have those political arguments and that we all listen and nod and agree with all of the speakers that we're hearing. The Minister who introduced the debate today, I thought, did an excellent job at laying out some of the cold, hard facts and making clear exactly why we have this day. The member for Hendon brought humanity into that with his own family's story. And we've heard from members across the House about their own personal views, about the views of Holocaust survivors, about the reading that they have done, and about genocides and massacres that have taken place, not just in the wake of the Second World War, but more recently as well. It is important that we remember all of this. It is important that we use the privileged position that we have here, the platform that we have in this House. We are incredibly lucky that we can amplify the voices of our constituents, that we're able to stand here and do that. And right now, we've got more of a responsibility than ever. We're seeing the rise of anti-Semitism. We're seeing, in the wake of what happened on October 7th, the rise of anti-Semitism on our streets here. The Anti-Semitism Policy Trust has got 2 reports out about the rise of anti-Semitism online and the inability of the AI systems, for example, in some of these websites to find anti-Semitic posts. And I would urge the government to have a look at these reports, particularly when it comes to X and the rise of issues that there are on there. We're seeing the rise of Islamophobia. We're seeing, and certainly seeing, constituents who are refugees and asylum seekers facing discrimination and prejudice that I haven't seen in the 20 years that I've been supporting and dealing with the public. It is new. It feels like we are in a different world. It feels like we have tipped over. We're seeing a rise in anti-trans and anti-gay, anti-lesbian hate on our streets as well. I think that really now is the point that we've all got to take action. We all have to recognise that whatever we've been doing to try and tackle this, whatever voices we have used, whatever moments we have taken to tackle it, we've not done enough. We're not there yet. We've not managed to tackle this. And whether or not we are capable, as a group of 650 individuals with a platform, of sorting it out, do you know, it doesn't matter whether or not we're capable of it. What matters is that we're trying every single day. What matters is that we're trying to make that difference. The member from Brent East talked about the fact, and a number of members did, to be fair, talked about the fact that Holocaust doesn't happen overnight. You don't go from a happy community to mass murder in a couple of days. What you do is you go through those stages. You go through that rise of hatred. You go through that dehumanisation and that othering of people. You go through a situation like there was in Germany after the First World War, where the population feel hard done by, where the population feel like their lives are not as good as they could be, and they want someone to blame. And they have politicians, they have the media, they have people standing up and saying, well, the person that you've got to blame for this, the people that you've got to blame for this, in that case was, they were saying the Jews are the people to blame for this. In that case, the population was being told the Jewish people are less human than you are, and they are to blame for the fact that your life is a struggle right now, that you're finding things difficult right now. Now, we know that that divisive rhetoric is being used around the world right now. We know it's being used here. We know, I'm sure all of you are getting a rise in the number of emails that are saying to you, I cannot afford to pay my energy bill, and that's because of the number of illegals that there are in this country. We are getting a rise in that, and we all need to stand up against that. And it's not just about countering that explicit hate that people come up with. It's not just about countering that when they're very obviously racist in the emails that they send you, or very obviously anti-Semitic in the emails that they send you. It's about countering those people that will stand up and say, yes, but you have to allow us our free speech. You have to allow us the freedom to say things that dehumanises others. It's about countering that chipping away at the hard-won rights that minority groups have. We need to be standing there and not just saying you're wrong when you're behaving in a racist way, you're wrong when you're using racist rhetoric. but also say, no, we will not reduce the rights that trans people have. We will not reduce the rights that gay people have. We will not reduce the rights that Jewish people have, that Muslims have, that people from all faiths should have to practice their faith. We should be standing for the equality and the rights that people have, as well as standing against the hatred. Reduction in those rights is how we got to the position where you end up at the end of the road with Auschwitz. That is the far end of that. The beginning is reducing the rights. The beginning is taking a Sharpie and writing through that trans people are no longer to be recognised. The beginning of the road is that point. The beginning of the road is saying that those people who riot against democracy, they're fine. That's cool. We'll let them carry on doing that. We need to use a platform in the way that many of us currently are doing, but we're certainly not winning right now. We need to tackle disinformation and misinformation, whether it's online, whether it's in person, and we need to tackle that diminution, that reduction in the rights that people have fought for and have gained. Madam Deputy Speaker, as I said, this is an incredibly poignant debate. I'm so proud and pleased of all of the MPs that have stood up and argued against that dehumanisation, that have talked about their experiences, the experiences of their constituents and the experiences of the survivors. We need to be doing this not just on Holocaust Memorial Day. We need to be working for a better future, every one of us, every single day. And there are so many good people out there who care a huge amount about this. We need to be mobilising them and taking them with us and ensuring that we're amplifying their voices as they talk in favour of that better future that we all would like to see.
Dr. Peter Prinsley.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. And may I say how very moved I have been by all of the speeches that I've heard in this afternoon's debate. So on Monday, I will stand in the Abbey Garden at Bury St Edmunds at a steel teardrop erected as a memorial not only to the 6 million Jews murdered in the Holocaust, but also to the 57 Jews slaughtered by their neighbours in Bury St Edmunds in March 1190. I will also honour the memory of the liberation of Auschwitz precisely 80 years ago. Now, East Anglia, Bury St Edmunds, Norwich, King's Lynn, were very important centres of medieval Jewish life. However, East Anglia also has a sad role in the history of European anti-Semitism. It was here that the myth of the Jewish blood libel first emerged, when in 1144 the Jews of Norwich were falsely accused of the ritual murder of a boy named William. This is the myth that persisted for centuries and played its part in the growth of anti-Semitism in the 20th century, and it lives on to this very day. The blood libel stoked hatred in Bury St Edmunds, culminating in that vicious massacre in 1190. In the aftermath, the town expelled all of the surviving Jews. And exactly 100 years later, in 1290, King Edward expelled all the Jews of England. So I stand here not only as the first Labour MP for Bury St Edmunds, but also its first Jewish MP. So I'm a Jew who represents a town that almost 1,000 years ago was the first in its country to expel the Jews. History has come full circle. However, anti-Semitism is sadly on the rise again in this country. The number of anti-Semitic hate crimes has reached record levels, more than doubling from the years before. The Community Security Trust, the CST, reports that the damage and desecration of Jewish property rose by 246% over the previous year, which is deeply concerning. Now, the CST do crucial work to protect Jewish communities across the country, enabled by the support of His Majesty's government, for which we are all deeply grateful. Similarly, Holocaust education, promoted through the work of the Holocaust Education Trust, and the Holocaust Memorial Day Trust is of such great significance in this country. In this generation, we are privileged to know the last few living witnesses of the Holocaust. Now, we must make sure that their stories do not fade into obscurity, but survive in the collective memory of humanity. I will finish with a few lines by the medieval poet, Mayor of Norwich, written as he fled from England in 1190, the earliest Hebrew poetry ever written in this country. When I hoped for good, evil arrived, yet I will wait for the light. You are mighty and full of light, for you turn the darkness into light. Thank you.
Clenos Medi.
And can I just say it's a privilege here to be in the words of kindness here today, where we join against hate on a day where we remember one of our worst times in history. 2025 marks the 80th anniversary of the liberation of the Auschwitz-Birkenau and the 30th anniversary of the genocide in Bosnia. As we look back and reflect on these horrors, we remember the stories of those who fell victim to unspeakable crimes and take a lesson from history. This year's theme is for a better future. As we consider what it means to build a better future, we must all look at what can be done to create a future that is no longer blighted by prejudice. Recent figures show that there is much work to be done to fulfil this promise. 80 years on from the liberation of the Auschwitz-Birkenau, religious hate crimes in England and Wales are at a record high. Home Office statistics show a 25% increase in religious hate crimes in the year to March 2024. The monitoring group Tell Mama UK said in October that it had recorded 4,971 incidents of anti-Muslim hate between October 23 and September 24, the highest annual total in the past 14 years. And from January to June 2024, the Community Security Trust charity recorded 1,978 reports of anti-Jewish hate incidents. That's up from 964 in the first half of 2023. The rise in this appalling hate crimes is a cause of deep concern, and all those who have been the victim of these crimes deserve our friendship and solidarity. Among those murdered in the Holocaust was Helen Melaine Labelle. Born to a Jewish father and a Catholic mother in Vienna, known affectionately as Helly, she loved to swim and go to the opera. After finishing her secondary education, she entered law school. At 19, she showed signs of a mental health condition, and she was forced to give up her law studies and her work, and was later diagnosed as schizophrenic. A year later, she became one of those thousands of mentally and physically disabled people murdered in Brandenburg killing centre. After the Second World War, many ordinary Germans and Europeans claimed that they were not involved, that they were bystanders to the events of the Holocaust. Their indifferences teaches us that passively remembering the Holocaust is not enough. We must continue to learn from and listen to the stories of the victims and the survivors, the Jewish, disabled, gay men and women whose lives were ended because the Nazis decided they didn't deserve to exist. As we look to the future, it is incumbent upon all of us here as parliamentarians to speak out against genocide, denial and distortion. We must forcefully speak out against prejudice and hate wherever it is found, whether here in the Parliament or in our own communities. Holocaust Memorial Day is a reminder to all of us that the fight against prejudice and intolerance must never cease. Only by continuing this fight in memory of Helly and the millions who died as she did, we can secure a better future.
Jazz Atwell.
Thank you very much, Madam Speaker. And can I commend the Minister for this debate, the way he introduced it, the tone, the pitch, and of course the whole chamber, how it's come together on such an important topic, such an important subject, a lesson we must all remember and we must all learn for a better future. Last Monday, I had the privilege of listening to Eva Clark, a survivor. 80 years on, she still broke down many times, reliving the horrors of losing family, loved ones. And I also had the privilege of listening to Samuel Besso, a survivor from 30 years ago from Srebrenica, who came here as a young lad in the northeast, and he told of his story, having lost his family, how he came to this country, this wonderful country, which gives us all hope, because he went to a school, even though he hated it, because he couldn't understand a word, because he wanted to be with his family. How, when he was living a life of terror and horror, having lost everyone, how he was in a strange place, how he was in a different room learning English. He was made to feel so welcome that whilst he was learning English, his classmates were learning his language to make him feel at home. That's the wonderful country we live in. And we will support all the communities when they're in need. And yet, 80 years ago, Europe experienced one of the greatest tragedies in human history: the systematic murder of 6 million Jewish men, women, and children. As the years progress, we're losing survivors, and the horrors of the Holocaust are passing out of living memory. It's incumbent on each one of us to ensure that their stories are not lost, that the barbaric treatment so many endured is never forgotten. Redbridge is a place I call home, where I've lived for half a century. It was historically a home to a thriving Jewish community. Families found a safe and welcoming home in Ilford, and our area was immeasurably enriched by our Jewish neighbours. The beauty of Ilford is not just our diversity, but the respect and love our diverse communities show for one another, celebrating one another's holidays and also sharing each other's greatest sorrows. Next Monday, I'll be in Valentine's Park for Holocaust Memorial Day, as I have been for the last 16 years, to commemorate, where all our communities come together, people of all faiths and none, to remember the Holocaust and to honour all those so cruelly taken and the lives irrevocably lost and changed forever. Nazi ideology preached hatred and division. By repudiating anti-Semitism, standing against hate, we make it clear every single day how much their hateful ideology failed and will always fail. The crimes of the Holocaust cast a shadow across the world. Families were destroyed, communities shattered, and we still live with the consequences today. Whole families erased, lineages wiped out, and generational trauma passed on. Preserving the memory of the Holocaust is our sacred duty to all those who lost their lives and whose futures were stolen. Because memory does not only work backwards, it also has the power to shape our present and our future. The words we say about the Holocaust in this place must translate into action. Every day, we must continue to work together to fight anti-Semitism, xenophobia and hate speech all across our wonderful country. Whilst we take the time today to reflect upon the horrors of the Holocaust, we must also reflect on the people we want to be and the society we want to live in. We each have the power to speak up and challenge racism, anti-Semitism and hate speech. And every time we do, the world gets a little bit better. We must ensure atrocities like the Holocaust never happen again. But we must also work to protect and advocate for those who are still suffering from the xenophobia, racism and violence which led to the Holocaust not so long ago. Madam Deputy Speaker, on Holocaust Memorial Day, it is incumbent on us to learn the lessons from the past to create a safer and better future for all. Thank you.
Liz Jarvis.
Here.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. I am grateful for the opportunity to contribute to this incredibly important debate. When I was a little girl, I spent quite a lot of time in hospital, and during one stay, I became friends with Paula, the girl in the next bed. Paula and her family had been in a terrible car crash, and her mum had her arm in a sling. One day she was rubbing her arm, and I noticed that on her skin there were several small black numbers. "What are those?" I asked. She explained that as a child she had been in a place called Auschwitz, and the numbers were so her mum and dad could find her if they ever became separated. It was a few years later, when I was learning about the Holocaust at school, that I finally understood what those numbers were and what they meant. On Monday, it is the 80th anniversary of the liberation of Auschwitz-Birkenau, and yesterday it was incredibly humbling to hear the testimony of Holocaust survivor Israel Abeles, now 94 years old, at the Holocaust Memorial Day ceremony. Hearing accounts of survivors, including Alfred Garwood, who was a baby in Bergen-Belsen, is crucial to ensure that we learn the lessons of history, and I would like to thank the Holocaust Memorial Day Trust for everything they do to educate, to speak out against Holocaust denial and distortion, and to challenge prejudice. We should all take inspiration from the survivors of the Holocaust who have bravely shared their stories in the hope that genocide and violations inflicted on defenceless people across the world will never happen again. Madam Deputy Speaker, I would also like to pay tribute to those who liberated the camps and all those from Eastleigh who have served, including in the Balkans. I was at school with several children from the former Yugoslavia, and I often wonder what became of them. This year we also mark the 30th anniversary of the Bosnian genocide, including the Srebrenica massacre, where 8,372 Muslims were killed. It is difficult to understand what drives a human being to murder another, but for all the victims and survivors of genocide, it's vital that we continue to learn about man's inhumanity to man and where hatred and othering can lead. As we reflect on these atrocities, I am also deeply proud of my constituency's long-standing history of providing refuge to those escaping persecution and conflict. During the Spanish Civil War, nearly 4,000 Basque children were sheltered in North Stoneham. In the aftermath of the Second World War, resettlement camps were built in Velmore and Hilton-Bree to house Polish families. And in 2021, Eastleigh became one of the first authorities in England to house Afghan refugees fleeing the Taliban. These acts of compassion and solidarity remind us that, even in the darkest of times, humanity can prevail. On Holocaust Memorial Day, we honour the memory of those who were murdered in the Holocaust and subsequent genocides in Cambodia, Rwanda, Bosnia and Darfur. We have a responsibility to learn from the past, to speak out and never forget. Today we pay tribute to all those who died and all those who survived.
Alex Sobel.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. On Monday, it'll be 80 years since the liberation of Auschwitz Birkenau. I went with my... I find this debate quite difficult, so people, please bear with me, members. So I went with my own family, my father and my two sons, to Auschwitz-Birkenau in the summer of 2023. I know that many members here have been to Auschwitz-Birkenau, and those that haven't, although it is a difficult place to visit, you should definitely visit. I thank the Prime Minister for his recent visit to Auschwitz-Birkenau. When you're there, you can imagine the industrial scale of murder that happened there. You see many skulls, shoes, clothes. You see the cabins where people had to live. You go through the killing stations where the Nazis murdered millions of people, Jews, LGBT community, Gypsy Roma community, trade unionists and others that they decided had to be removed in their genocide, in our Holocaust. That really commits you to ensure that you want to see the future education of generations on this subject. And you understand, and you also understand, and I've been to Poole in Warsaw, which also is it's a history of Jews in Poland, but obviously has a very significant section on the issues of anti-Semitism in that country, and I'll come to those later in my speech. But you understand the causes much better, and the rise, and how you could get to that point. And this year's theme for Holocaust Memorial is for a better future. So I want to maybe uplift a little bit, thinking about that theme for a better future. My own grandparents returned after the war, after the Holocaust, to Poland and Lithuania. Post the Yalta Agreement, these were very different countries to before the war. They returned hoping to rebuild their lives, as did the few of my family who survived camps and ghettos. It was still very difficult after the war, and some still prevalent. On that same trip, as you know, the year before, I visited Warsaw with my father, just me and him. He took me to where he grew up, in the tower blocks in Warsaw, and told me stories of how he received anti-Semitic abuse and bullying as a child in Warsaw after the war from Polish children. And this was after everybody knew about the Holocaust, everybody knew about the camps. And that unfortunately for Jewish people is the reality. And to add to this, there were the anti-Semitic attitudes of state authorities, which in the end resulted in mass emigration of 13,000 Jews, almost the entire remaining Jewish population of Poland, in 1968, which is 23 years after the war, but still very much in recent memory for those people. So all of this made attempts to rebuild lives in Eastern Europe very difficult, not just in Poland, other countries as well. So my own parents emigrated from Eastern Europe in the 50s and 60s, and in the end arrived here in Leeds, in the UK, in the 1970s. A similar fate was the way thousands of Jews came out of communist and post-communist countries and found homes contributing to their new countries, economically, socially and culturally. I just want to tell one story of two of my former constituents, former because they are no longer with us, who were very close family friends. I spent a lot of my time growing up in their house, and they certainly contributed a lot to my own Holocaust education. Janina Baumann was a Holocaust survivor. Having survived the Warsaw Ghetto, she, in fact, with her sister and her mother, escaped the ghetto, and there were many amazing Polish people were hidden by a Polish family in the countryside. And her husband, Professor Zygmunt Baumann, they came to Leeds in the 1970s, where Professor Baumann worked as a professor of sociology. He was one of the most decorated sociology professors in the world, and his books are, world-class and outstanding. His own literature took on the theoretical effect of the Holocaust and mentality. He came up with the theory of liquid life as part of postmodernity. I don't want to get into sociology lecture. That's not the place. It's not the place for that in the chamber. But if you're interested in those subjects, certainly look up his work. His wife, Janina Baumann, who I said survived the ghetto, she wrote 2 books about her own life, her own history. And one was about her life in Poland before the war, and one was about her experience during and immediately after the war. And those books are recognised as part of a very important canon of literature on the Holocaust. I'm really proud that they both lived.
Honourable friend, give way.
Yeah.
I thank my honourable friend for giving way and his powerful speech. It shows just how important it is that the living memory is passed on, and why we should continue to have this debate in Parliament on this day.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. So I just want to conclude talking about the Baumans. Professor Zygmunt Bauman actually died in February 2017. He was a great supporter of mine, obviously, and had placards outside his house in the elections I stood in. Unfortunately, never got to see me elect to this place, but hopefully I can record, my thanks to them. So, as we said, this debate is about better future for those from post-conflict zones, those that have had to suffer genocide. I just want to say that all the subsequent genocides recognised by the United Kingdom all happened in my lifetime, just about. Cambodia, Rwanda, the regime of Slobodan Milosevic and the Serbs, and now, very recently, actually, since I became Member of Parliament, the utter atrocious murder of the Yazidis by Daesh, and I'm afraid to say, if we look at Syria now, that is a genocide that is unfortunately probably not yet concluded, and so we need to act today on that. So their better future isn't a better future for today, it's still a better future for tomorrow. And I've met people, particularly those in the Balkans who were victims of Slobodan Milosevic's regime, people exactly the same age as me, similar backgrounds, experience, but having to witness and experience the most awful and traumatic things. And I've seen some of the exhibits in the Balkans of the genocide, of the actions of the Milosevic regime. And the many aspects of those that really did remind me, were reminiscent of what I saw in Auschwitz-Birkenau. Exhibitions of single shoes of children, for instance, and items of clothing, children that would disappear, children they don't know what happened to them, they never found them, there's no bodies. The genocide in the Balkans was different, obviously, to the Holocaust, but it was, as we recognise, a genocide nevertheless. And people in those countries are still suffering post-conflict, and they still don't have the stability of stable countries in countries like Bosnia with the tensions. And I think the Minister, though he's not in his place, made excellent contribution on the issues in the Balkans, which I hope we can debate in a more contemporary debate with the Minister for Europe, but with Republika Srpska in particular, and I'm planning to go to the Balkans again this year. I think it's all of our duties to try, because it is very near, it's very near to us, and those activities happened within the political lifetimes from those people. Some of the people in charge of Serbia were involved in the regime of Slobodan Milosevic, including the President of Serbia. So these are still things that are very close, very tight, and for their better future, for people in the Balkans, those issues are not yet resolved. So we need to work on them here, not in a historical, not in an educational way, but in a very real and political way now. And everybody that's suffered in a conflict, post-conflict zone, it's our duty as a country to support them for their better future. Thank you.
Iqbal Mohammed.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. It's an honour to be able to speak in this debate today, and I want to pay tribute to all my honourable and right honourable friends who have contributed to this debate. They're very powerful, moving, and many instances personal accounts. In the UK, the Holocaust Memorial Day, we remember the 6 million Jews murdered during the Holocaust, alongside the millions of people murdered under the Nazis' persecution of other groups, and in more recent genocides in Cambodia, Rwanda, Bosnia, Darfur, and others who suffered atrocities since World War II. Yesterday I had the privilege of attending the Holocaust Memorial Day ceremony in PCH, and I heard the moving testimonies of Holocaust survivors Israel Ablez and Alfred Garwood. I won't be the only person in this house who was deeply moved by their testimonies, and those who listened to Radio 4 early in the week by the interview of 92-year-old Holocaust survivor Ivor Pearl, who was just 12 years old when forced into a cattle truck to Auschwitz, where he lost most of his family. What struck me about Ivor was how, despite everything he had seen and endured, he retained his capacity for love and his belief in the power of love. But I was also struck by his sense of pessimism about the future and his feeling that the world today increasingly resembled the world of the 1930s. And I'm sad to say, I share that concern. We have seen a growth across Europe of a politics that unashamedly demonizes minority communities and presents them as aliens in our midst, to such a degree that people become inured to their plight or ill treatment. The Holocaust shows us where this toxic combination can lead. The Nazis' attempt to rid Europe of what they saw as an alien presence in its midst did not happen overnight. They first had to dehumanize the Jews, depict them as an alien culture, subject them to anti-Semitic conspiracy theories that they were part of a global conspiracy to manipulate global events, and strip them of their citizenship rights. In his recent film, Occupied City, the director, Steve McQueen, shows how that unfolded in one city, Amsterdam, where the bulk of the Dutch Jewish population lived. His film chronicles the measures the Nazis took. They sacked all Jews from public sector jobs. They banned them from all public places, closed down all Jewish schools, forced Jews to wear a special badge to demarcate them from everybody else, prevented Jews from marrying non-Jews, subjected them to daily humiliation and physical abuse, and ultimately rounded up and deported every Jew they could find to death camps. The film chronicles the most tremendous heroism of ordinary Dutch people to resist these measures and show solidarity with their Jewish neighbours. But it also shows that anti-Semitism had taken seed in Dutch society. Years of anti-Semitic propaganda had rotted the foundations of their society, and many ordinary people collaborated in the persecution of the Jews and betrayed their neighbours. A Jewish community that numbered around 80,000 at the start of the Nazi occupation was reduced to 16,000 by the end of the occupation. And that picture was repeated in city after city after city across Europe. But these words do nothing to capture the sheer terror and horror of what experience must have been like for the many millions of people unfortunate enough to have experienced it. The generational trauma it has left in its wake resonates with every Jewish family to this day. The Holocaust embodies the reality of fascism in power. Unfortunately, those ideas at the core of fascist ideology, racist narratives wrapped up in ethno-nationalist fantasies, are on the rise. In Germany at present, we see the far-right ADF, a party with neo-Nazis in its ranks, on track to be comfortably the second largest party in the German parliament. In Austria, the far-right Freedom Party recently won a third of the popular vote with an election pledge to remigrate citizens with migrant heritage. A similar dynamic is well underway in France, Italy and other countries where the far-right have significant electoral footholds. These are not fascist parties of the classic type, but they are walking on that ground. And when members, I'm sorry to say, of this House demonise and talk about deporting immigrants, and the President of the United States commits to deporting millions of immigrant families, with the richest man in the world cheering him on while giving fascist salutes, it should send a shiver down everyone's spine. There is more than a whiff of 1930s in the air. The Holocaust Memorial Day also pays tribute to the genocides in Cambodia, Rwanda, Darfur and Bosnia. We've already heard from the member from Brigg and Immingham and others about the genocide in Bosnia that resulted in over the death of 100,000 men, women and children, with 8,000 murdered in the Srebrenica massacre. I just want to pay tribute to the other genocides that are part of Holocaust Remembrance Day. The genocide in Cambodia in the 70s, where the Khmer Rouge sought to create a communist utopia, forcing urban populations into rural camps. Intellectuals, professionals, religious leaders and ethnic minorities were targeted. Approximately 1.7 to 2 million people, about 25% of Cambodia's population, were killed through executions, starvations and forced labour. In Rwanda in the 90s, over a span of 100 days, an estimated 800,000 to 1 million Tutsi and moderate Hutus were massacred. The genocide was fueled by deep ethnic tensions, propaganda and political instability. And in Darfur, where the atrocities continue, government-backed militias have carried out mass killings, rape and displacement in response to an uprising by rebel groups. The conflict is categorized by ethnic cleansing, with hundreds of thousands of people killed and millions displaced. Unfortunately, violence and instability continue in the region. There are more recent examples, like Myanmar and others, but I will continue. As we remember on this 80th anniversary, all those affected by the Holocaust and the Bosniaks killed in Srebrenica 30 years ago, as well as the victims of the genocide I've just mentioned. We should also remember all those who have suffered atrocities in approximately 285 distinct armed conflicts, or in their day-to-day lives since the end of the Second World War. And let us recommit to never allow the politics of hatred, racism and demonization that contributed to the awful reality of fascism take hold in our society ever again. In his interview, Ivor Pearl said that the world has not learned anything, gets repeated all over again. And he is right. I believe we have heard from across the House that we have failed to fulfil the promise of never again. Never again for every single human being that walks this planet. In 80 years. However, there is nothing stopping us from fulfilling it from now. for all people, of all nations, all abilities, of all faiths and none, and set an example for the people of our country and the wider world to follow. Thank you, Madam Deputy.
Mark Seward.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. Can I start by saying what a privilege it is to follow the incredible speeches that we've heard across the House today. It has been especially powerful hearing the testimonies of people that have come and descended from the families of Holocaust survivors. And I do want to pay tribute to several members before I begin the substance of my speech today. First of all, the member for Hendon, who has been referenced countless times, and rightly so. His family history is a powerful reminder, and I am absolutely certain that his family will be proud of him because he got to come to this place on these benches and share his story, and I'm incredibly grateful for that. In exactly the same vein, the member for Leeds Central and Headingley gave such a powerful account. Now, he and I have known each other for many, many years, before either of us made it to this house. He got here in 2017, so he is a veteran by most standards. I've been here for 6 months. But I have never heard him speak in that way about his family history before, and it was such a privilege to be here as he did so, and I thank him for that. Thank him for that. We've heard other great speeches too, and I do want to pay special thanks to the member for Harrow East. He set out in great detail the opportunities that were potentially missed to prevent the Holocaust, or at least mitigate some of its impacts. I have often wondered, despite studying history, I have often wondered what could have been done to prevent this catastrophe from ever taking place. And I really appreciate his insight into what the Allies could have done sooner to prevent it from happening. The member for Bury St Edmunds and Stowmarket, I hope I've pronounced that correctly, gave an excellent short contribution, and I am so proud that he is the first Labour MP to represent that constituency in this House. He has given many, many good contributions, and I've found listening to him particularly powerful in today's debates, but also in other debates too. And of course, the member for Eastleigh talked about Portcullis House and the ceremony that we attended yesterday. It was especially powerful to hear from Yisrael and Alfred, the two Holocaust survivors, because as the member stated, and as many members have stated in the House today, the window to speak to survivors, to hear their first-hand testimony, is shrinking. So I am especially grateful to Mr. Speaker and his office for arranging that. The member for High Peak, my honourable friend, set out exactly why we need to be vigilant to the terror of anti-Semitism, to the spectre of anti-Semitism that haunts Britain's streets today. He spoke far more powerfully than I can and summed up the issues much, much more succinctly than I could. But we know today in Britain's streets that Jewish people are less safe than they were before October the 7th. That cannot be right, and I thank him for his contributions and for highlighting that. I also thank the honourable member for Rochdale, my honourable friend. His speech was incredibly powerful, and I always enjoy listening to his testimony, especially since he was a former newspaper column writer, and that certainly came through in the words that he wrote for his contribution today, and I thank him for that. Madam Deputy Speaker, Monday the 27th of January will mark a sombre day of reflection and remembrance. 80 years after the liberation of Auschwitz-Birkenau, this year's Holocaust Memorial Day is an important anniversary that we must all observe. Now, in November, I had the privilege of joining the European Jewish Association on their delegation to Auschwitz and Krakow. Now, in Krakow, we talked about the spectre of anti-Semitism and what needs to be done to prevent it and to prevent such a tragedy from ever happening again. And for my part, I talked about my experience as a maths teacher in a secondary school before I made it to this place, and the role that I thought Holocaust education had to play in preventing such tragedies in the future. However, the most important part of the visit was our visit to Auschwitz and Auschwitz-Birkenau. We laid wreaths and we paid tributes to the millions of victims of the Holocaust. Now, to stand in that place where human beings committed the most evil acts imaginable was a harrowing experience. I cannot share all of the details today, but something struck me while I was there. I was standing in the field just past the gates of Auschwitz-Birkenau, and I was stunned by the scale and the size of the camp. I had never imagined it being as large as it was. Murder on an industrial scale. Now, most of the accommodation that was built for the camp's inhabitants, and of course I use that word accommodation knowing it does no justice to the terrible conditions that people were kept in, but most of it was made of wood, and so it's long since perished. However, the chimneys of the accommodation were built from bricks, and they still stand, and I was taken aback by an enormous field of chimneys stretching as far as I could see. The worst of humanity on display for all. But it is so important that that camp stands as a lesson and stands in history forever, so that all of us can learn about the horrors of the Holocaust. It will stay with me forever. Now, Madam Deputy Speaker, while liberation brought an end to the horrors of Nazi extermination and torture, it did come too late for 6 million Jewish people and all of the other victims of the Holocaust. We owe it to all of them to ensure that never again means never again. Now, some of the people who have survived Auschwitz and the Holocaust have shared their stories with us, and I referenced some of them earlier. Powerful lessons can always be learned from these testimonies. I'd like to pay tribute to one of those survivors today. Ibi Nil was a Leeds resident for most of her life following World War II. However, in her youth, Ibi fled to Hungary to escape Nazi-occupied Czechoslovakia. But sadly, she was still captured and she was still deported to Auschwitz-Birkenau. Now, with your permission, Madam Deputy Speaker, I'd like to read a little bit of Ibi's testimony today. And please understand that any reference to you is just taken from her testimony. This is what she wrote after she arriving at Auschwitz-Birkenau. When we arrived, men in striped pyjamas opened the doors and told us to leave the sick, the old, and the children. Men and women were separated. I and 4 other women, 2 of them doctors, linked arms and moved past the doctor. We had arrived in Auschwitz-Birkenau. We were told to strip, had the hair shaved off all of our bodies, and then pushed into the showers. Normal practice included, at this stage, the registration and tattooing of each person's identity number on their left arm. But there were so many of us that the ink ran out, and I was not tattooed. We were given some clothes and taken into the camp. 250 women went into each hut. The people in charge of my hut were Czech, so I could speak to them and got a slightly larger ration of watery soup and a slightly larger piece of blanket. There was so little room that we had to sleep squashed up like spoons. Every morning, midday and evening, everyone was counted, and this could take 3 or 4 hours. You had to strip and hold your clothes above your head. If you swayed or stumbled, you were taken away and never seen again. We were taken to be showered once a week. If anyone was taken ill, they were taken to the hospital hut and then usually to the gas chambers. Worse than hunger was the thirst, and in summer there was no water at all. On the 26th of July, the doctor asked for volunteers. I, with 2 doctors and 2 nurses who had come together to Auschwitz, had realised that if we stayed there, we would die. We therefore volunteered and went with a slave labour transport of 530 Hungarian women to Germany. We spent overnight in another hutment where a twin I knew from Czechoslovakia asked me to tell the world what I had seen, because she was being experimented on as part of the twins by a doctor, and they did not believe they would survive. We left Auschwitz-Birkenau on the 27th of July. Her testimony is incredibly powerful. She knew that if she died in that camp, if she stayed in that camp, she would die. So she took the opportunity to go to Germany, an opportunity that few had, until she was liberated while on a death march on Easter Sunday, 1945. Now, Ibby married and came to England and lived in Leeds, and she was later supported by the Holocaust Survivors Friendship Association, based in Leeds. They now run Holocaust Centre North, which is a museum in Huddersfield devoted to telling a global history of the Holocaust through the local stories of survivors and refugees like Ibby. Now, Ibby spent the remainder of her later life telling that story that I've shared with you now. She wanted to educate future generations about the horrors of the Holocaust, and I pay tribute to Ibby and all of the survivors. They have given their accounts so that we can learn the lessons and ensure that it never happens again. Now, members have already spoken about the theme for this Holocaust Memorial Day, and it is all about taking action for a better future. Now, given the rise in anti-Semitism in the UK and across Europe, we have to prioritise action to stop this evil. My honourable member, the member for High Peak, my honourable friend, the member for High Peak, already set this out in very clear terms. I welcome that the government has allocated £54 million for the Community Security Trust to continue their vital work in protecting the Jewish community. I also welcome that the Prime Minister took the opportunity at PMQs a few weeks ago to reiterate his commitment to this money. I also think that education is key here as well. As a former teacher, I know the power that education has to inspire understanding. The Holocaust must never become a footnote in history, especially as we approach that era that I spoke about, where we will no longer be able to hear survivors provide their testimony in person. And so to that end, I want to put my gratitude, on record my gratitude, to the Holocaust Education Trust, who do an incredible amount to educate teachers and provide high-quality material to schools. I'm also pleased that the government has continued the cross-party consensus that exists in the need to properly support and fund Holocaust education. We have pledged an additional £2 million to support the Holocaust Educational Trust and their crucial work. We are also committed to building a new Holocaust Memorial and Learning Centre. And I welcome that the Holocaust education itself will remain mandatory on the national curriculum. And on that point, I do want to speak about the trials that are going ahead on Holocaust education in some schools to see how we can further expand it. We need to ensure that it's not just embedded in the curriculum, that it stays with our young people beyond school. While I was in Poland for that visit, I spoke with a journalist, a young man from Gildersham in my constituency, and he was asking me about the post office that was under threat. But I told him where I was, and he said, "Oh yes, no, the Holocaust. Well, we had a few lessons on that in school, but not much more." And that struck a chord with me, that struck a note. Because if he's saying that, and this was somebody who was switched on, interested in politics, becoming a journalist, then there are bound to be other students who could be left behind. And that's why it's so important that these trials that are going on at the moment are used, and then, if they are successful, rolled out to the national curriculum much more widely. We all must continue to learn the lessons from humanity's darkest time. Now, before I conclude, Madam Deputy Speaker, I do want to pay tribute to the Leeds Jewish community for the events they always organise across Leeds for Holocaust Memorial Day. So this Sunday, we will see the Civic Remembrance event at City Varieties, an event I've attended before. It will remember those murdered in the Holocaust, as well as subsequent genocides in Cambodia, Rwanda, Bosnia and Darfur, and I'm very pleased to hear those genocides referenced in the House today across all parties. There will be readings and candles lit by representatives of all those who were persecuted, including Holocaust survivors. We will come together as a city to remember those we lost, as we always do every year, and we always will. Now, all of us in this House have a duty to use our voices to uphold the memory of the Holocaust, its victims and its survivors. We owe it to everyone who died. We will never forget them. The words "never again" will stand for all time. And I know that everyone in this House will work towards that end. Thank you.
I call the Shadow Minister, David Simmons.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. It's a privilege and an honour, as a Shadow Minister, but also as the co-chair of the All-Party Parliamentary Group for British Jews, to close today's debate on the Holocaust Memorial Day. I'd like to share also the very complimentary observations from many members about the Minister's opening of today's debate, which was very clear in restating the importance of recalling in particular the Holocaust that took place in the Second World War, targeted on 6 million Jews and people from all kinds of minority backgrounds, but also, as has been reflected in the many contributions from members across the Chamber, to ensure that when we debate these issues, we are also thinking about the lessons that we can learn from what happened then, from earlier tragedies, and from events since, in order to ensure that we are, as far as possible, doing what we can to ensure that those kinds of events are never repeated. There have been many moving and impactful speeches. The member for Hendon, the member for Harrow East, the member for Brigg and Immingham, the member for Leicester South, the member for Dewsbury and Batley, all made contributions, as did every speaker, that in my closing I'll try and reflect, in particular where those points made relate to lessons that we need to learn about the future. It is incredibly important to hear the testimony of survivors, and I join colleagues in paying tribute to people like my constituent, Paul Slade, who is one of those Holocaust survivors who travels the country with the Holocaust Memorial Day Trust, speaking about what he experienced as a child and the impact that that had on him and his family and his wider community. These are all reminders of the human stories that make the level of inhumanity that was shown in the Holocaust even harder to comprehend. It's also an opportunity to reflect that even in the midst of all that darkness, there are examples of humanity, of people in difficult situations taking steps to preserve the lives of their neighbours and sometimes as strangers in their community. I had the opportunity to visit the Wannsee Villa, a beautiful lakeside house on the outskirts of Berlin, a place like my constituency. And that house was the command centre for the Holocaust. It's where the committees of Nazi politicians, police, military met to manage the logistics. And today it is a museum where they display all of the records that were kept of all of the meetings that took place. The thing that I found very striking about it as a visiting politician was the banality of that evidence and records. It was like reading the minutes of planning committees that I saw in a local authority. It listed who attended and what they discussed. But instead of recording the details of people's extensions and changes of design of their home and their neighbours' views, they record in detail the planning and the execution of a government-level strategy of mass murder. And that emphasises, I think, the importance of learning from history. When we see the statue at Friedrichstraße Station, the memorial there to the Kindertransport, and recall that at the end of World War II, when the Russian forces arrived in Berlin, they found 1,700 Jewish people living in that city who'd been sheltered by a combination of city authorities and neighbours. That even in those dark places, there were those who were willing to help. But also important to remember that anti-Semitism is something that has much older roots. And I was very struck by the contribution of the member for Bury St Edmunds, who talked about the blood libel. It always seems to me a great irony in a world which often seems very polarised that even further back than that, the Islamic Caliphate that ruled Spain, with which much of Christian Europe was at war for centuries, was the one place of safety in Europe for Jewish people for a very long time. This is something which has deep roots, and it is incumbent upon us to be aware of those roots if we are going to deal with it effectively. The members also spoke about the need to spot examples of similar human behaviour in more recent years. Srebrenica was described, and many members spoke movingly of their own experiences and insights from that. And as we saw in the displays yesterday at Mr. Speaker's event, the story of what happened in Rwanda was set out, one of the most hideous genocides that's taken place in the modern era. And many of us will recall seeing TV news, hearing on the radio, as that tragedy unfolded. But on the theme of today's debate, I think that is a good example of where we see a country that is now a modern and democratic nation, that is working with other nations across Europe and the United Nations, for example, to resettle refugees. There is evidence that when terrible things happen, people may not progress always quickly to a perfect situation, but that we can learn, we can identify those lessons, and we can seek to make amends. But, Madam Deputy Speaker, this debate, as well as an opportunity to recall what happened, is also an opportunity for us to reflect in policy terms some of the things that we as a nation and a parliament need to do. And to that end, I think it's important to acknowledge, for example, our commitment as a nation, our commitment through our government to the European Convention on Human Rights, which expresses some of those fundamental and ancient British values around the rule of law and due process across 46 different nations, many of whom chose to enshrine those values because they wanted to learn from the events that led up to the Holocaust and ensure that they never happened again. And whilst there is always that scope for debate about whether treaties and conventions are fit for the modern age, making sure that we continue to be a nation that works alongside the UN, that values international law and international agreements, from the United Nations Commission to refugees to the International Maritime Organization, that enshrines the rules about how we would treat those people, such as refugees in small boats who find themselves in distress at sea. Because all of these things have a bearing on how we work with other countries as a leading nation and a leading voice in that international community to encourage others to share our values of liberty and democracy too. And when we recall, as the member for Harrow East, my constituency neighbour, did, in such historical detail, the events leading up to World War II, it puts in context the debates that we have in this chamber about defence spending. And we can debate figures, but there is clearly a broad commitment to move towards 2.5% of GDP to go towards defence. But as the member for Harrow East set out, we had commitments to others across Europe in 1939, which we simply could not in practice meet. Our country was able to defend itself, as the subsequent Battle of Britain showed. But we all are in a position to ask ourselves, as the member for Harrow East posed that challenge, what would have been different if we'd learnt lessons differently, if we'd acted sooner? Would we have been able, in some small measure or some greater measure, to prevent the tragedy that unfolded, that took so many innocent lives? And we know that the United Kingdom is not a global policeman anymore. The years of the so-called Victorian Pax Britannica are clearly long gone. But there remains scope for free nations to work together. And many of those free nations do have an honourable history in this respect. We talked a lot within our departmental portfolio about Grenfell Tower. Grenfell was sent to deal with the consequences of atrocities in the Sudan that caused serious concern across the world in the Victorian era. British troops, British forces, British diplomacy were frequently deployed, as in Benin, because of concern about the large-scale loss of life and atrocities that were destabilising communities. And when we look around our modern world, we see what's happened with the Russianisation of the deported Ukrainian children taken from their families to another country to be changed into citizens of a different place with a different outlook. We look at what's happened to the Uyghur peoples, the Rohingya. We look at the unfolding tragedy that we've seen in Gaza and Israel. All of these things are reminders that whilst we may not be able to directly intervene and put a stop to them, that the combined forces of the international community can be extremely powerful. That whilst we may not always be able to intervene early enough to prevent the worst of a tragedy, we do still have the scope to make a difference. And I know, Madam Deputy Speaker, many of us will be conscious in the lives of our own constituents, as I heard very movingly from Rabbi Aaron Goldstein, who is the Rabbi at the Ark Synagogue in my constituency, which my colleague, the member for South West Hertfordshire, had joined me in a visit to. They are twinned with synagogues in Ukraine. We're holding services together with people whose homes are being bombed, whose synagogues are under attack. So whilst the Holocaust that we are talking about is a historical event, its consequence and the attitudes behind it are very much alive, not just in Europe, but elsewhere in the world today. So in closing, Madam Deputy Speaker, I'd like to add the thanks of the opposition to a number of those organisations that do incredibly important work, in particular in what has been an era of heightened tension and heightened fear of anti-Semitism. I applaud the fact that the government has carried on the cross-party work of providing the necessary finance so that the Community Security Trust, which is a very visible presence around the synagogues in my constituency, can provide that assurance to our Jewish citizens and to their friends and their neighbours that they are able to freely practice their faith, to associate with their community without fear. And despite much of the debate that's taken place around marches in central London, I welcome the fact that for most of our communities, relationships remain very, very good. And in particular, relationships that were built up during the COVID era, when people of all different faiths, when churches and community organisations came together, that those have stood us in good stead, and people have not allowed themselves to be divided. I'd also like to place on the record my thanks to the Metropolitan Police and the police forces across the country, who have responded robustly but with sensitivity. And it's worth putting alongside that the long-standing cross-party support that's been in place since 2016 to ensure that, as well as the CST, which provides specific security assistance for synagogues and for our Jewish community, there's been funding to ensure that our Muslim community also enjoy an additional level of security and protection. Because this is a country in which all of those people who testified about their experiences of coming from Holocaust-blighted Europe to make a new start described the importance of being in a place where freedom applies to everybody. It is not something which is conserved and is solely the preserve of the few. And it is enormously important that the work of the Holocaust Memorial Day Trust and the education programmes that sit alongside it, that those programmes continue so that all of our children and future generations have the opportunity that we've had to hear the testimony of those who've been through these dark periods, and the opportunity, as many members described so movingly, to learn from history and ensure that we do not repeat its worst mistakes.
I call the Minister, Roshnara Ali.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. It's an honour to be speaking in this Holocaust Memorial Day debate. I am grateful to honourable members from all sides of this House for their powerful and moving contributions to this important debate. And I'm also grateful to the front bench spokespersons responding, and of course to my ministerial colleague for opening this debate. This year, Holocaust Memorial Day marks the 80th anniversary of the liberation of Auschwitz-Birkenau. It's an especially poignant occasion, as members have highlighted. It is the last major anniversary when we can expect to have significant numbers of Holocaust survivors able to share their testimonies. We have heard from many honourable members of the impact listening to these first-hand witnesses have had on them, and indeed, in my own experience, the impact it has had on me. We have listened to personal reflections of the lasting influence of visits to Auschwitz-Birkenau and other camps across Europe. Some members have spoken about their own family members' experience of the Holocaust. My honourable friends bravely spoken about the experiences, the trauma and the suffering of their families. Today's debate is about remembering the 6 million Jewish men, women, and children murdered during the Holocaust, the most horrific of all crimes ever committed. Remembering the Holocaust is a human rights imperative. The Holocaust stands out as one of the defining moments of history that has shaped the conscience of humanity. This debate has highlighted that the past few years have not been easy for British Jews, with anti-Semitism on the rise across Europe and the UK. It has also shown that contemporary anti-Semitism revolves around the Holocaust, with some blaming the Holocaust on Jews or suggesting that Jews focus on this tragedy to gain advantage. As well as Holocaust denial, we are seeing the growing use of Holocaust distortion, as has been pointed out by members, and intentional efforts to excuse or minimize the impact of the Holocaust. Today, Holocaust denial and distortion move instantaneously across social media and are amplified by algorithms which drive anger, hate, and division. And as we mark the 80th anniversary of the liberation of Auschwitz-Birkenau, it is right for us to be reminded of what unchecked behaviours and violent bigotry can lead to. We all have a duty and a role to play in rooting out anti-Semitism where we see it, and the Jewish community can be assured that this government will stand shoulder to shoulder with them. The message is clear. We cannot remember the victims of the Holocaust without fighting anti-Semitism and hate today. Madam Deputy Speaker, that is why we remain determined to create the UK National Memorial and Learning Centre at Victoria Tower Gardens. The proposed Holocaust Memorial and Learning Centre's exhibition will address the impact of anti-Semitism. And I'd like to echo the many tributes made today to Karen Pollock, the Chief Executive of the Holocaust Education Trust, who, along with her team, does inspirational work for our country. And I also want to pay tribute to the work of the Holocaust Memorial Day Trust and their CEO, Olivia Marks-Waldman. I pay tribute to some of the other Holocaust remembrance, education, and survivor organisations which enrich the work we do. Organisations like Jewish Cares Holocaust Survivors Centre in Golders Green, the Wyner Holocaust Library, the Association of Jewish Refugees, the National Holocaust Centre in Newark, Nottinghamshire, Holocaust North at Huddersfield University, and UCL's Centre for Holocaust Education. We are all aware that the number of Holocaust survivors, Madam Deputy Speaker, as has been pointed out today in this debate, are dwindling, and we will rely on their children and their grandchildren to share their testimonies. That is why I would also like to pay tribute, a special tribute, to organisations like Generation to Generation. the Holocaust education charity that was established to empower second and third generation Holocaust survivor descendants to present their family histories to a wide variety of audiences. Through the use of survivor testimony, G2G aimed to keep these Holocaust stories alive to ensure that we never forget. Madam Deputy Speaker, I want to take this opportunity to speak to the speeches that have been made, the powerful, inspirational, moving speeches that my honourable friends, I say that, my honourable friends across the House have made today. And I will begin by speaking to the speech that was made by my honourable friend, the member for Hendon. A number of honourable members have spoken, referred to his speech, the powerful story, his father's story of being a Holocaust survivor, the struggles, the heroism of Maria, the pride we all take across this House to see him in this House representing his constituency and being in this Parliament, speaking out today. It is stories like his and his family's that we must make sure that children and the next generation continue to learn from, so that we fight intolerance and hatred anywhere across our country, across the world. And I know he works passionately along with other colleagues to campaign against intolerance and hate in our country and elsewhere. I also want to pay a special tribute to my honourable friend, the member for Leeds Central and Headingley, for his incredibly powerful speech. I have heard him over the years speaking on this day, in this debate and other debates about his own family's history and their struggles. It is these testimonies that are so important for us to be able to hear, because that experience, that connection that we all have is so important, because the trauma that generations after a genocide face never go away, never diminish. And it is right that we as fellow citizens, as friends, can support each other, whatever our faith, whatever our background, and act in solidarity. I want to thank the opposition front bench spokesman for his opening speech, where he spoke powerfully about, along with other members of the House, about the genocides that have sadly subsequently taken place after the Holocaust. Cambodia, Bosnia, Rwanda, Darfur. And of course, the many other examples of human rights violations that exist in our country. Honourable members, the front bench spokesman referred to others where there have been major human rights violations. I myself campaigned in opposition for many years against the persecution of Rohingya Muslims, and I am incredibly grateful to the British Jewish community and many others across different faiths and those of no faiths for working with me on that campaign to secure a referral to the International Court of Justice of the Myanmar military on precisely the matter of genocide, and the support of prominent lawyers like Philippe Sands, my great friend Philippe Sands, who wrote a book called East-West Street, which documents the stories, his own family's story, but also the stories of Lemkin and Lauterpacht, the architects of modern day, the international legal framework as we know it, and the enormous contribution of the Jewish community in the post-war period that continues to influence our international legal system, particularly on human rights and genocide. I give way to my
I'd like to also pay tribute to my honourable friend's own personal fortitude in standing up to hate, particularly at the last general election, where she, along with many other Labour candidates, suffered abuse on the doorstep. And there's a lot of talk today about combating hate, but there are many candidates who turned a blind eye to their own supporters, using the phrase genocide enablers and child murderers in the last election, which was utterly disgusting. Will she join me in condemning that?
Yeah. I'm grateful to my honourable friend. What's really important is that we all ensure that we are peacemakers at home. As if we want to see peace and security, both here at home and elsewhere in the world, we have to be able to work together in solidarity. We have to be fellow citizens. We have to practice what we preach. And it's really important that we ensure our democracy is kept safe. And those of all backgrounds who stand for public office, locally and nationally, can stand for our democratic system, free from hatred and intolerance and bigotry and hostility, whichever party they belong to. That is how we will protect our democracy. Madam Deputy Speaker, I want to also draw attention to the speech that was made by the Honourable Member for Mid-Dorset and North Poole. She reflected powerfully of her experience of joining delegations to Israel and the occupied Palestinian territories. She, along with other honourable members, talked about their work and also visits to Yad Vashem. I too had the opportunity to make two visits over the years on delegations to Israel and the occupied Palestinian territories with members across the House. And I want to draw attention to one of the members that in the Lords, that I had the opportunity to visit the occupied Palestinian territories with, who was the child of the kinder transport, who went on to become a member of the House of Lords, a member of the Parliament, and then a member of the House of Lords. And it is because of the heroism of the British hero, Nicholas Winton, that he was able to survive the Holocaust, Lord Dubs. And we had the opportunity to visit the occupied Palestinian territories, and he continues to campaign, as we all know, for refugees, child refugees, and he has continued to campaign with many of us over the years for peace in the Middle East. There are many others who, in our country, who benefited from the heroism of those who took part to get children out of during that period through the kinder transport. I know that the Honourable Member in her speech talked about the importance of Holocaust education, and I'm incredibly proud of the fact that this government, building on the work of the previous government, continues to be committed to bridging divisions between communities, making sure we challenge hatred, and we continue to work closely with community groups, with charities and public sector partners to ensure that we build that solidarity. This government is actively exploring more integrated and cohesive approaches to tackling hate crime, and we will share more information in due course. We have allocated £54 million for the Community Security Task to continue their vital work until 2028, providing security to schools, synagogues and other Jewish community buildings. We have committed to reversing the previous government's decision to downgrade the recording and monitoring of anti-Semitic non-crime hate incidents. Madam Deputy Speaker, my honourable friend, the member for Brent, reflected on the harrowing case of her own constituent's mother who was kidnapped and in Gaza. She also talked powerfully about the importance of working together to tackle anti-Semitism and anti-Muslim hatred and Islamophobia, and the need to come together, building on the theme of creating a better future for all. A number of honourable members talked about the importance of the theme of this year's Holocaust Memorial Day. And the member for Harrow East, my honourable friend, the member for Harrow East, who has never missed a debate since 2010, since his election in 2010 on this debate, spoke powerfully about the importance of tackling anti-Semitism and talked about the origin of the Holocaust and the escalation of anti-Semitism. And of course, powerfully about the Holocaust Memorial Bill, along with the Education Centre. He raised some important questions about the work on lessons from Auschwitz. The Department for Education supports, along with our department, the teaching of Holocaust education by funding 2 programs, in one of which he referred to for 16 to 18-year-olds, and of course creating the opportunity for young people to visit Auschwitz-Birkenau. We will continue to work together to make sure that we support the education effort. The Department of Education has also set out an ambitious plan to enable students to have the opportunity to hear recorded survivor testimony. They have committed £2 million in the autumn budget to support this work. And the department's also exploring how it can support schools to fulfil that ambition. Madam Deputy Speaker, the member for Leigh and Atherton, my honourable friend, talked again also about the importance of Holocaust education. A number of members have talked about the vital need for making sure we continue to invest in Holocaust education. I've seen how powerful that is in schools in my own constituency, including, of course, along with the organisations I've mentioned, the Anne Frank Trust and many others. And I know in relation to the question that my honourable friend, the member for Briggs and Immingham, raised just to highlight resourcing over the past 20 years, the UK has committed over £2.5 million of funds to projects dealing with the aftermath of the Srebrenica genocide, including towards the funding of the construction of the Srebrenica Putokari Genocide Memorial Centre. My honourable friend, the member for High Peak, highlighted the increase in anti-Semitic attacks since October the 7th. We are, as I pointed out, we are taking action to provide support, protection for synagogues, for schools, and other important institutions, and any form, of course, of racism and racial hatred is completely unacceptable in our society. We've allocated £54 million to the Community Security Trust to continue their work until 2028, providing that security to those institutions that feel very much at risk and under threat. The Community Security Trust, Madam Deputy Speaker, recorded a total of 325 university-related incidents over the 2 academic years covered by their report, 53 incidents in 2023 and 272 in 2023-24. This is completely unacceptable. It's a 117% increase from the total of 150 campus incidents recorded from 2020 to 22. So we know we have to act. We have to make sure that there is that protection available. We've seen this rising increase, and we must do, and we will do all we can to support universities, to support students, and of course to make sure that students from different backgrounds, different faiths can come together and not be allowed to be divided by particular forces that seek to divide people from different communities, particularly in the British Jewish community and in the British Muslim community. Madam Deputy Speaker, my honourable friend, the member for Chichester, talked about the importance of tackling disinformation and extremism. And we know this is absolutely critical, and there is a very important role to play in terms of the work of the Online Harms Act, introduced by the last government with commitment from this government to make sure we implement that. The online space has become more and more problematic, and we have to make sure we tackle those underlying causes as best we can to protect people against anti-Semitism and other forms of hate. My honourable friend, the member for Cowdenbeath and Kirkcaldy, made an incredibly powerful contribution, as many others have, but she particularly drew attention to her great-grandfather, her Jewish heritage, and I found it incredibly moving because I didn't know about her great-grandfather and his story. And I want to pay tribute to her for the work she has done tirelessly throughout her career, fighting against those, fighting in and working tirelessly for those who are suffering globally, and in particular for her work on humanitarian issues in conflict zones, and of course her work with medical aid for Palestinians. She is an inspiration to so many of us in this House. My honourable friend, the member for South West Norfolk, talked about the Holocaust Memorial Day 80 Candles project, which the Deputy Prime Minister took part in, and he also referred to the UK as being a signatory of the Stockholm Declaration, and of course much wider contributions about the UK presidency and the contribution that the UK is making. The honourable member for Tewkesbury talked powerfully about the need to guard against the demonisation of Jews, Muslims and refugees. Powerful contributions about our need to constantly fight against intolerance and hatred. My honourable friend, the member for Rochdale, spoke powerfully about the importance of recognising and remembering the Srebrenica massacre and the genocide, that genocide in Bosnia. The work on Srebrenica, it was a genocide, as has been confirmed by the international courts, and we must never forget the victims. The UK has consistently urged all political parties, political leaders in Bosnia and Herzegovina and the region to reject hate speech and to condemn any glorification of the perpetrators of genocide and war crimes. And over the past 20 years, the UK has committed over £2.5 million of funding, as I mentioned, to projects dealing with the aftermath of the Srebrenica genocide. The honourable member, the honourable member for Aberdeen North, highlighted, as others have pointed out, the unity across this House in this very important debate, and I hope that we can maintain that. I hope that when it comes to issues of fighting intolerance, fighting anti-Semitism, fighting anti-Muslim hatred and hatred towards other minority groups, those with protected characteristics, those with disabilities, and many others, that we can form common cause, that it's not left to days like this that we come together, that we consistently work against hatred and intolerance and demonisation. The honourable member, and I want to, Madam Deputy Speaker, also speak to the interventions that this government, building on the work of the previous government, is taking to protect the British Muslim community, particularly after the October the 7th terrorist attack and the conflict in light of the war in Gaza. Anti-Muslim hatred and anti-Muslim intolerance has grown in our country. This year, the government has made up to 29.4 million of protective security funding available to the British Muslim community organisations to ensure that there is support to protect institutions from being targeted, and we have sadly seen examples of that, the targeting of mosques and faith schools and other organisations. We have also committed over £1 million to support victims of Islamophobia and anti-Muslim hatred. The Honourable Member for Bury St Edmunds, my honourable friend, and Stowe Market talked about the history of anti-Semitism through the centuries, powerfully talked about the stories of blood libel in the 11th century. It's a great source of pride again to see him in this House. The first Labour MP, the first representative of Jewish heritage, Jewish faith in his constituency. We are incredibly proud to have you in this House. Madam Deputy Speaker, other members have spoken powerfully on a range of issues, and I won't be able to speak and refer to each one of them, but I just want to say how inspiring their contributions have been today, how powerful their contributions have been. And it's incredibly heartening to hear about their leadership role in their communities, because it is that leadership role, whether you are a local representative or a national representative as members of Parliament, it is the need to constantly work at fighting intolerance wherever we see it that must guide and influence our work in our everyday lives. And that is the importance and vital contribution, of course, of the work of the Holocaust education charities, the painstaking work that goes on in our constituencies. And I've seen that firsthand in my own constituency, in the way that these organisations bring different communities, bring children, as well as adults from different faiths and those of no faiths, to learn from that history, the history of what happened in the Holocaust, and make sure that we don't allow these atrocities to happen again. Madam Deputy Speaker, this year's national ceremony will be filmed and broadcast on BBC One at 7 p.m. on Monday, the 27th of January. At 8 p.m, there will be a Light the Darkness moment, when iconic buildings across the United Kingdom will be lit to remember the Holocaust. These include the Houses of Parliament, Cardiff Castle, Edinburgh Castle, Belfast City Hall, Tyne Bridge, Clifford Tower in York, the London Eye, Stormont, and Royal Liver Building. We can all play our part by placing a candle in our window at 8 p.m. It is our responsibility to inspire future generations to stand up against hatred, prejudice, and evil. The lessons of the Holocaust are not Jewish, but universal. And the lessons remain relevant today. As my honourable friend, the Minister of State, said in his opening remarks, the long-awaited ceasefire in Gaza began on Sunday, 19 February. We saw the release of 3 hostages taken in October the 7th, including British-Israeli hostage Emily Damari, and the release of hundreds of Palestinians. Across this House, we all hope these first tentative steps will lead to a lasting peace, where Israelis and Palestinians can live in peace and security. And on a personal note, Madam Deputy Speaker, I want to pay tribute to the British Jewish community in my own constituency, where there has been a presence for many generations. And in particular, I want to recognise the contribution they made in the Battle of Cable Street in my constituency, when they stood up with trade unionists and many others to fight Oswald Mosley's fascists, when through the generations they, working with others across our society, made places like the East End safe for people like me, for those who came afterwards in the British Catholic community who moved subsequently, the British Muslim community and many others. That is the spirit of our country, different communities coming together to support each other and to create a safe space for us to fight against intolerance. I'd like us all to take a minute also to remember all those survivors who shared their testimonies and who are no longer with us. I want to pay tribute to the work they have done over the many decades. The theme of Holocaust Memorial Day for 2025 is For a Better Future. It is an opportunity, as others have said, for people to come together, learn about the past, and take actions to make a better future for all. There is much we can all do to create a better future. We can speak up against a Holocaust and genocide denial and distortion. We can challenge prejudice. We can encourage others to learn about the Holocaust, as well as other victims of the Nazis and the subsequent genocides. In remembering the 6 million Jewish victims of the Holocaust and the millions of other victims of the Nazis, let us all vow to work together in unity, in solidarity, for a better future.
The question is that this House has considered Holocaust Memorial Day. As many of that opinion say aye. Aye. The contrary, no. The ayes have it. The ayes have it.